All right.
I'm a yes.
Senate will please come to order. This morning we will take a brief moment of silence as you prepare for a long day. Thank you. Are there any announcements? Seeing none. We have for referral H429 appearing on the calendar for notice, but affecting the expenditure of the state will be referred to the Committee on Appropriations. We have a House bill for reference, introduced by Representative Page and others. Please listen to the first reading of the bill. First reading of the bill.
H21, an act relating to landlord notice of utility disconnections.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill, and by Rule 44A, it is referred to the Committee on Rules. Are there any other announcements? Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pending entry onto the calendar for notice, I move that the rules be suspended and H452, an act relating to expanding apprenticeship and other workforce opportunities, be taken up for immediate consideration.
Now the Senate, I think that's the first motion.
That's the first part.
It is. Now the Senator from Windsor has moved that pending entry onto the calendar for notice, the Senator from Windsor moves that the rules be suspended and H452, an act relating to expanding apprenticeship and other workforce opportunities, be taken up for immediate consideration. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have suspended your rules to take up H452 for immediate consideration. H452 was read for the first time and was referred to the Committee on Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, which considers that when the bill be amended, it's just recommend that the bill pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H452, an act relating to expanding apprenticeship and other workforce opportunities.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill for the report on the Committee on Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, the Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. When we can be nimble, it's so great. Love it. In 2023, we are lucky enough to have not one, but two workforce development bills. The workforce development policy and program proposals in H484, which we looked at earlier this year in the budget, were part one, and the bill before you, H452, is part two. Last year, Vermont got a sizable federal grant to modernize our apprenticeship system and our statutes. The result of the statutory work is before you in H452. And despite its rather late arrival on our 2023 policy platter, it's important to pass it now to bring us into compliance with federal law and to draw down federal funds and to codify current apprenticeship practice and protections, which those expectations are embedded in the policy work we have already passed this session. So this bill will bring us into alignment, which is very important. This bill will update the current statutory framework in Vermont to both modernize the apprenticeship program, ensure compliance with federal requirements, and harmonize current practice with statutory language. The federal regulations were last updated in 2008, and according to the Department of Labor's knowledge, we haven't looked at and or updated the statutory work in Vermont's apprenticeship language since its inception in the 1940s, and then again it was updated in the 1960s. So we haven't actually done this work since the 1960s. Much of the current statutory language, it's only 5 pages currently in statute, and you'll see here it's 52 pages. is outdated, contradictory, and does not give the department the necessary statutory framework to create a modern and expansive apprenticeship program to meet the 21st century needs of our apprenticeship workforce. This update is necessary for the department to remain in compliance with its programs and requirements to be eligible to continue to receive federal competitive awards for the department and expansion of apprenticeship programs in Vermont. And why is this needed now? We desperately need clarity for the department's authority. The department does not have the clear statutory authority to administer the programs that we do administer in compliance with federal law and regulations. This puts us in jeopardy of being out of compliance with the United States Department of Labor. We also need it for the security of grant funding. Being out of compliance jeopardizes our department's ability both for the current grant awards as well as future grant opportunities in the event that we do not pass this bill. For example, the department has received $450,000 from USDOL to modernize this program, including updating the statutory language. This grant expires in June, and if this language doesn't pass, the department will not have completed one of the agreements in the grant, and USDOL could pursue recovery of that $450,000. In addition, the department has applied for additional grant funds to expand apprenticeships. We now have youth apprenticeships, pre-apprenticeships. There are really exciting apprenticeship opportunities that are being acted on now, and we want to make sure that we do those in many occupations. They've expanded quite a bit, which is exciting. Our failure to deliver on a stated grant activity will affect scoring for our future grant applications and may result in the department missing out on this grant request and losing $304,000 in federal investments in the state. And the last additional reason for us to do this now is for the safety of our apprenticeships and expansion of workforce opportunities. Currently, apprentices are at risk due to the lack of statutory structure around pre-apprenticeships and youth apprenticeships. Vermonters are being taken advantage of in this space, being misled by employers that their work is within an apprenticeship program. This language will allow the Department of Labor to ensure the safety of Vermont's workforce if they're in an apprenticeship program. This will also allow the department to expand ratios for the apprenticeship programs that are registered and allow for an expansion of the workforce capacities of apprenticeship program sponsors and lead to more and better jobs for Vermonters. This will provide employer relief and allow them to include more trainees, which is really important. The ratios of one-on-one could be now one-on-two so that they could have an apprentice with them in addition, which is actually very important as we all are looking at our workforce shortages here. The department is receiving daily requests from employers seeking variances in this provision to employ more Vermonters looking to enter apprenticeships, and boy, do we want them there. And as I've already said, I'm quite excited about some of the expansion opportunities in apprenticeships, particularly with our CTE programs, with our youth apprentices, and with our pre-apprenticeship programs. Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs voted 5-0-0 in favor of this much-needed statutory update and asks for the Senate's support. Thank you.
So the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've ordered third reading of H452. I'd now like to recognize the senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this moment, I would like to move the rules be suspended and H452, an act relating to expanding apprenticeship and other workforce opportunities, be placed in all remaining stages of passage.
Now, the senator from Windsor has moved that the rules be suspended and H452, an act relating to expanding apprenticeship and other workforce opportunities, be placed in all remaining stages of passage. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've suspended your rules in order to place H 452 through all remaining stages of passage. Third reading has been ordered on H 452. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 452, an act relating to expanding apprenticeship and other workforce opportunities.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill. The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H 452. Senator from Windsor.
Thank you. I move that the rules be suspended and that H 452, an act relating to expanding workforce apprenticeship and other workforce opportunities, be messaged to the House forthwith.
Now the senator from Windsor has moved that the rules be suspended and H 452, an act relating to expanding apprenticeship and other workforce opportunities, be messaged to the House forthwith. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have suspended your rules in order to move the bill be sent to the House forthwith. Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I would move that H brought up for immediate action. And if I might just quickly explain to the body what we're doing. We have been in discussions with the other body about childcare for the duration of this year. And we have different opinions, it's fair to say, about the financing of that bill. And so, given actions taken in the other body yesterday, late last afternoon, the Appropriations Committee moved to add what we have done in this chamber on childcare to 217, an act relating to miscellaneous workers' compensation amendments. So the thought is that we will, if this rule suspension passes, we will bring this UI bill to which has been added childcare up for immediate discussion. And then the idea would be to pass it third reading tomorrow and move it to the House so that our childcare bill financing would be before the other body. At a later point, the chair of appropriations and the chair of finance will explain their reasoning on that. But I give it to you just as an explanation that what you will be seeing is in large part the childcare bill that we have already passed out of the chamber, added to the material on UI and other workers' compensation. So I would again move that the rules be suspended to take up 217 for immediate action.
Now, the senator from Chittenden Central has moved that the Senate suspend its rules in order to take up for immediate action from the notice calendar, H 217, an act relating to miscellaneous workers' compensation amendments. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, you suspend the rules in order to take up for immediate action H 217. 217 was referred to Committee on Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, which consider the same and recommends that when the bill be amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill is then referred to Committee on Finance, which recommends that when the bill be amended, the bill ought to pass. Then the bill is then referred to Committee on Appropriations, also recommends that when the bill be amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H 217, an act relating to miscellaneous workers' compensation amendments.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill for the report of the Committee on Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, the Senator from Windsor, Senator Harrison.
Wyndham?
Well,
That's okay, we're neighbors. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to speak to the bill as recommended by the committee, as well as the proposed amendment. H 217 is a bill about workers' compensation, the insurance program that protects workers who are injured on the job. The bill was combined with an unemployment insurance bill, H 55, because both deal with labor laws, and as you heard, it's now carries another important mission. H217 came to the Senate Economic Development Committee as a 3-page bill. It included the annual premium that funds the state's costs to regulate the program and 2 amendments to the existing program. The changes to the statute in the original bill that we received from the House were, first, to establish that if the General Assembly does not set a new rate of contribution for the premium, and remember, this is just a portion of the premium that funds the state's costs, the rate remains the same as it was in the previous fiscal year. The purpose of this language is to have a backup plan in the event the General Assembly does not set a rate, which also means that the workers' comp bill will no longer be a must-pass bill. The second change that was made in the House was to make permanent an 8-year pilot program which added 14 days for injured workers to dispute discontinuance of benefits. The Economic Development Committee kept these provisions, made additional changes, and added amendments to the unemployment insurance matters that were originally passed by the House as part of H55. So the section outline starts on, or the sections rather, the bill is in the calendar on page 2912. And I'll go through this section by section. Section 1 is the annual rate setting for the surcharge that funds the state's costs that I mentioned. The rate is unchanged from last year at 1.5%, with self-insured employers paying 1%. Section 2 also includes a provision I mentioned that the rate to fund the state's programs will be unchanged if the General Assembly does not establish a new rate. Section 3 amends the provision that would have sunset the additional 14 days for workers to present evidence in the case of a pending discontinuance, so that provision would become permanent. Section 4 is the first section with language added by our Senate committee. It expands the pre-authorization for medical treatment to include other benefits such as medical equipment and prescription medicine. Section 5 adds language regarding work searches, which employers may require if the injured employee is medically released to return to work, but the employer is not able to offer work that the injured employee is able to do. The new language says that the employer may not require work searches when an employee already has a job, which makes sense, that they are currently working in, the original job or new one, or if the employee is scheduled to undergo surgery. It also says that the maximum number of work searches that are allowed to be required is 3 per week, and this aligns with the unemployment regulations. Section 6 amends the formula for temporary partial disability benefits. There are actually 4 categories of disability benefits, but I won't go into all of them unless somebody wants me to. The existing formula for temporary partial disability benefits has the unintended consequence of resulting in some low-wage workers receiving less compensation when they return to work than they had received when they were not working. And this is obviously not desirable. And I want to point out that it was the advocates for the workers who brought this to our attention. The added language says that the benefits will be the greater of the old formula and a new formula. This section also clarifies that cost of living adjustments only apply after at least 26 weeks of benefits, and it adds a dependent benefit of $20 per week for each child under 21. This dependent benefit change comes up later in the bill, and so I just want to explain that a little bit. The weekly amount for dependent expenses has not changed for more than 40 years. The benefit was established in 1953 at $10. I'm sorry, lower than that. I don't know the original number, but the benefit was established in 1953 in acknowledgement that injured workers with children still had to provide for those children when they were unable to work. The benefit was increased 4 times in the first 29 years it existed. Since 1982, the benefit has been just $10 per week per child. The department was not in favor of the increase to $20 per week and the expansion of the benefit to temporary partial. To address those concerns, Section 7 is a 2028 sunset of the new dependent benefit. The proposed amendment that I will get to, but the amendment is relevant to this conversation, would authorize the Commissioners of Labor and Financial Regulation to report on the impact of the dependent benefit increase in 2027 so that it can be reviewed before the increase is sunset. And that's for all categories of temporary disability. Sections 8 and 9 make the same changes as Section 6, but for temporary total disability as opposed to temporary partial, which again is to clarify that cost of living increase is only after 26 weeks. The dependent benefit is increased from $10 a week to $20, and there's a sunset of the dependent increase in 2028. Section 10 clarifies that cost of living adjustments for permanent disability benefits occur every July 1, regardless of how long the benefits have been received. Section 11 clarifies when a claimant can recover costs and attorney's fees based on existing statute and Department of Labor rules and practice. Section 12 requires the Commissioner of Labor to adopt rules to implement sections 4 through 11 by July 1, 2024. So now we get to unemployment insurance, which was the bill H55. Section 13 updates the definitions of child and spouse to be inclusive and consistent with other statutes. Section 14 extends unemployment insurance requirements to nonprofit employers with fewer than 4 employees. This was a problem during the pandemic because many employees of these employers thought that they were eligible for unemployment insurance, and that became a problem when they found out that they were not. This provision would be effective July 1, 2024. Section 15 makes technical changes to the provisions permitting nonprofit employers to reimburse the unemployment insurance program for benefits paid to their former employees in lieu of paying payroll taxes on current employees' wages. And this has to do with the way that unemployment insurance is allocated because it's the last 5 quarters of experience. And I won't get into that anymore unless somebody wants to. Section 16 directs the Department of Labor to develop information for nonprofit and municipal employers so that these employers are aware of their responsibilities and options. Section 17 corrects an arithmetic error in the sunset for supplemental unemployment insurance benefits to ensure that it sunsets at the time that the legislature intended. Section 18 requires the Department of Labor to prepare a report in consultation with the Joint Fiscal Office by January 15, 2024, regarding the impacts of extending coverage for unemployment due to urgent, compelling, or necessitous circumstances such as illness, escaping domestic or sexual violence, or caring for an ill or injured family member. Section 19 requires the Department of Labor to report by January 15, 2024 on the utilization of the Domestic and Sexual Violence Survivors Transitional Employment Program over the past 10 years, a summary of how the department has made the public aware of the program, and how to increase awareness and utilization. Section 20, notice to the public, requires the Department of Labor to inform the public about the Domestic and Sexual Violence Survivors Transitional Employment Program, including by providing information and materials to organizations that work with domestic and sexual violence survivors. Section 21 is the effective dates. This section and sections 1 and 3 take effect on passage. Section 14, which is the extension to nonprofits, takes effect July 1, 2024. Sections 7 and 9 take effect July 1, 2028. Those are the sunsets of the $20 weekly dependent benefit. All others take effect July 1, 2023. So then we also have an amendment, and the amendment has to do with the increased dependent benefit, and that's where the committee added a study to analyze the costs and the benefits of that increased benefit. And the Commissioners of Labor and Financial Regulation will do that study by January 15, 2027, report back to the committees on the impact of the increase, both the number of claims that received benefits as well as the increased cost to the system. So, the committee received testimony from Department of Labor, including Dirk Anderson, Director of Workers' Compensation and Safety, Cameron Wood, Policy and Legislative Affairs Director. We heard from Kelly Massacote, hope I'm saying her name correctly, attorney, Vermont Association for Justice, David Mickenberg, also Vermont Association for Justice. We heard from Vermont Legal Aid, James Feehan, American Property and Casualty Insurance Association. So those are the insurers who actually provide the workers' comp, or the workers' comp insurance. Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and our Legislative Council. Mr. President, your Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs Committee passed this bill and the amendment with votes of 5-0-0 and ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. The bill was then referred to the Committee on Finance, which recommends that when amended, the bill ought to pass for the report of the Committee on Finance. Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance looked at this bill as it's written with the sunsets and the studies. We determined that the impact on the unemployment insurance rates would be negligible, and we voted to support 502.
Now, the bill was then referred to the Committee on Appropriations. For the report of the Committee on Appropriations, the Senator from Chittenden Southeast, Senator Lyons.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the pro tem has indicated, the Appropriations Committee reviewed this bill and felt compelled to add on the child care language, some of which has been negotiated between House and Senate members of Human Services and Health and Welfare, and other language, of course, concerns around the funding for the child care programs. So as you look at page 2932, Mr. President, I know we've been through this bill previously. I will try to give a higher level and then indicate some of the appropriations that are included in the bill, and then finally the payroll tax that is included as a way of identifying revenue for our child care program. So on 2932, the legislative intent is consistent to improve access to quality child care services and equitable access and quality of pre-K education, provide financial stability to our child care programs throughout the state. We know they have been destabilized during the pandemic, and we're losing them left and right. Stabilize Vermont's talented child care workforce, and that is also an important aspect of the bill. Address workforce needs of the state employers. Employers understand now the need for child care to ensure that their employees can be present at work. And then to maintain a mixed delivery system for pre-K and child care and after-school and summer programs. And assign school districts responsibility of ensuring equitable pre-K access for children. So that's the intent. That hasn't changed. It's been consolidated a bit. But we continue to believe that these are critically important for the economy of the state and for workers in the state. Section 2 is a pre-kindergarten education study. This is consistent with what our education committee proposed. There's some, maybe some slight modification of the questions that are being asked. On page 2937, or excuse me, yeah, on 2937, you'll see an appropriation of $5,000 to the Agency of Education for per diem compensation for the members of the committee making the study, and a sum of $100,000 from the general fund to the Agency of Education for the work involved there. The pre-K, on page 2937, the pre-K education model contract will be developed and proposed, and then a pre-K pupil weighting report, which is consistent with what passed, I think, from this body, and data collection on page 2938. Section 3 is deleted, and that's a section that had some pre-K weighting changes embedded in it, and your Appropriations Committee felt that that was inconsistent with the position that the Senate had proposed earlier. 2939, continuing, we get into Section 5 with the Child Financial Assistance, CCFAP, Child Care Financial Assistance Program eligibility. And there's a section there that allows for a provider to offer lower tuition rates should they feel that they would like to do that to help workers with access child care. On page 2940, we see some flexibility included for increasing for the commissioner of the Department of Developmental DCF and CDD to provide funds for child care facilities. And then a big section, in number 2, families with an annual gross income of less than or equal to 175% of the current federal poverty guideline shall not have a family copayment. This is consistent. The bill that passed out of the Senate had a level of 185. The House had a level of 150. And so this would begin in April of 2024 and allow for folks who earn 175% or less of the federal poverty level to not be required to have a co-payment for their child care program. On page, if you look at the bottom of page 2940, there begins some language for eligibility, and this number 6 on page 2941 relates to the citizenship status that would otherwise exclude a resident from participating in child care. We are beginning that program that was consistent with our bill on July 2024 and will be funded through the general fund since we cannot utilize any federal dollars for that purpose. On the bottom of page 2941 in section 5C, you'll notice that the upper level for the federal poverty level for receiving a subsidy for child care will move from 400%, which is established on the previous page in April of 2024, and that will go up to 575% of the federal poverty level, allowing for families who earn up to 575% of the federal poverty level to receive a subsidy for their child care. This will begin on October 2024. The Senate Health and Welfare Committee had recommended a 600% level, and the House had recommended a 500%. So we're somewhere in the middle at 575. The family contribution for co-pays then will begin in April 24. That the language in 5D probably isn't necessary. It's consistent with the current table for co-pays at $25. Section 6 on page 2942 is the section that will increase the base for our child care centers to be equivalent with what we currently have for all of our 5-star programs. And not only that, but we'll increase that level by 35%. As the bill left this Senate, it was at 38.5%, and so that has been reduced somewhat. That will begin in January of 24, but it will enhance the base funding for our child care centers and allow for some greater sustainability of those programs. On page 2942, you'll see the appropriation, the full appropriation for raising the child care benefit to 175% of federal poverty level and to the 400% of the federal poverty level as the top. That's the initial increase that we had talked about earlier. And the total requirement for that, and it also includes the 35% increase that I just talked about for the base increase. So the total amount is $47,800,000. And your Committee on Appropriations will have a recommendation for how to collect those dollars. On page 2943, there is $4 million that will be provided to the Department of Children and Families for 11 new permanent classified positions to administer the program as it's being amended. On page 2943, and that is actually consistent both with the Senate and with the House, and there's also an allocation there for the community child care support agencies of $2 million. That's also consistent with what each body passed. On page 2943 in section 8, there are readiness payments. These are incentive payments for programs to improve the quality of care for kids. And as the bill left this Senate, it was at 25 million. The House had a little over 18 million, and we have put in a $20 million amount. On page 2944, payment to providers, which will begin, the payment schedule will begin on January 2024. And then, again, increased payment to providers for center-based child care and preschool programs, increasing those home programs by 50% beginning in July 24. We're seeing more home programs in jeopardy, financial jeopardy, and this will begin to bring their base up to about 50% of what the center-based programs are at. Then, beginning in January of 24, we see reports coming back and reimbursement rates for 25 and 26 being established. And then a description of the child care quality and capacity incentive programs. On page 2947, 10A, the child care quality and capacity incentive programs will have an amount of $10 million appropriated. On page, and then the tuition rates, consistent with what we have indicated earlier, some flexibility for the department. Then there's some disclosure information, background checks that are all consistent with the work that we have done, some language modification based on work with the other body. And then page 2951, an appropriation to Building Bright Futures, which is consistent with the work that they will be doing in section 7 of the bill. There's the $4 million that I mentioned earlier. There'll be a contribution of $260 plus for that work. And then provider wages. This is consistent with section 11 of S56 that the Senate passed out. And then if you move to page 2953, there's a description of the child care contribution or a payroll tax that that the Senate Appropriations believes will be effective in raising sufficient funds to support all the services that we're talking about, with little exception. Some of the information that I've provided information about general fund dollars as well. But overall, the payroll tax will be a 0.43% of each employee's covered wages and each self-employed individual self-employment income. It will be a distribution of 25% for the employee and 75% for the employer. And it's based on joint fiscal office projections. Then finally, on page 2957, there is a fiscal year appropriation from the general fund to the Vermont Division of Taxes of a little over $4 million to support the positions necessary for the tax department to administer the program that we are putting in place. And Mr. President, beyond that, then would be redundant with the report that the senator from Windham has already given on workers' compensation. That is so that would conclude your Appropriations Committee report. Basically, we have added in the child care provisions to the workers' compensation bill, and we ask that the Senate support our work. Thank you, Mr. President.
So the question is, shall the report of the Committee on Economic Development be amended as offered by the Committee on Appropriations? Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Obviously, the Appropriations Committee was very busy yesterday afternoon. You're going to see that there were some changes, and I would have to say, as we've tried to work toward a middle ground, we are reflected here. Our child care bill, as we passed it, included a parental leave benefit. And we felt that was important. It would have been 12 weeks, and the thought was, do we pay a child care professional, or do we allow the parent to have that opportunity? As we tried to get to a middle ground, this amendment does not include that parental leave benefit, where some of us are sorry that was part of what we had agreed to concede. The other part in the Finance Committee, there was a redirection of the revenues that would fund the refundable child care tax credit. The other body was very determined that was a priority last year to put that benefit in place. A part of the rationale was the cost of child care. And we had determined that, in fact, we were addressing the cost of child care through this expansion, including the increased subsidies and the level of support we were providing to families. But once again, in an effort to come to a middle ground, we agreed not to to terminate that benefit. But there are some other minor changes that are here, but I just want to state that the fundamental difference here is that S56, as it was passed, used a funding mechanism because we have to add more money to support this level of expansion, had gone to the payroll tax with a split between employee and employer. There seems to be, that's where we're not able to bridge the differences. Our conclusion was that there was a very direct nexus because child care benefits are only paid if you're working. And employers say they need employees. And so we know that for many families, child care is such an important support to their employment. But for employers, it's also necessary for them to meet a very difficult and competitive workforce environment. So I wanted to state that what you have here in the amendment does, in a number of places, give concessions in an attempt to get to a common ground, but the other body has not, they have another bill where they have gone to the payroll tax as the funding stream. Our position is that this is, that they've, no, I'm talking about the other bill that was passed and is currently in economic development. That's how they were using the payroll tax. That's, I'm not referring to the current discussion about how they would fund childcare. Let me be clear. The payroll tax was passed by the other body, but it was part of another bill, a leave bill, family and medical leave. So what is the issue of debate here is funding, and right now, the childcare expansion in the other body would be funded by an increase in income taxes and corporate taxes. And that is where we are saying that we do not think is where we would want to address the revenues and generate the revenues. So I want to be clear, the other body has passed a payroll tax, but for a different purpose. We have always from the get-go have said the payroll tax was the logical place to generate the revenues to support this major investment in our child care program, and ultimately to bring as many Vermonters to the workplace and to extend or expand their hours of work, that which is really critical to meeting our workforce need. So I just want to make it clear what we're doing in this amendment, what has fundamentally been removed in an effort to come to a common place. Unfortunately, we have not been able to achieve that, and that's the reason for the amendment that you see before you today from Senate Appropriations. Thank you.
Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to quickly re-emphasize a couple of the points that the Chair of Appropriations just made, because they were good points. What you see before you is, in our opinion, an olive branch to the other body. The two concessions that the Chair of Appropriations mentioned, removing the parental leave and keeping the child tax credit, that's a total of $45 million or so that we have moved in the direction of the other body. That is substantial. Where we haven't moved is on the financing mechanism, and the reason is very much as the Chair of Appropriations just said. Both bodies have passed a payroll tax this year. Neither body has raised the corporate or the income tax, and we don't believe that that's a wise move at this moment, especially when we're within days of adjournment where we would need rule suspensions and other things. So for many reasons, what you see in front of you retains the payroll tax as the financing mechanism, but to be clear, it does have an open hand to the other body by giving them things that have been important to them throughout the process. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the report of the Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs be amended as offered by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the report of Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs as offered by the Committee on Appropriations. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs as amended? Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the reporter of the bill, the original person?
The senator from Windham is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question. In your report, you mentioned that the department was against increasing the weekly benefit for employees during disability for the child dependent, for dependent children. They were against raising it from $10 to $20 a week. And could you remind me how long has it been just $10 a week?
Mr. President, the department had concerns about raising the amount from $10 to $20 per week. And I believe it was in the 80s that it was 1981.
Since 1981. So it has been, let me quickly do the math here, 42 years since it's been raised. And they are concerned about raising it from $10 to $20 a week. That seems really unbelievable to me. These are people who are unable to work because of a disability, and they have dependent children. And the department is concerned about raising it from $10 to $20 after it hasn't been raised in over 40 years. So I appreciate the fact that it's temporarily raised in here, and I see that there's a report back, and I just want to say on the record that I really hope the department comes back and says, hey, $20 is really not much for a dependent child of somebody who can't work because they're disabled. So I appreciate what I see is probably a compromise, but it seems to me a compromise that should not have been necessary, that we want to make sure that people who are not able to work and who have children are getting the money that they need to support those children. So I thank the presenter and thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Economic Development as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Economic Development and General Affairs as amended. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this is the right time to ask this question, but with the child care portion going into this bill, I wasn't quite sure. And my question is about the makeup of the Pre-Kindergarten Education Study Committee and why there are no legislative members of that committee. And I don't know who the right person to inquire of is.
I was about to say, I don't know the answer, nor if I did, could I answer it. But I would believe it would be the Senator for Appropriations would be who you'd be interrogating for that portion of the bill.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's a very good question, and it's something that we did discuss during our committee work on S56 initially, and thinking that the folks who are listed for the study are those who have the expertise and the data that could inform the work, and that's why we did not include legislators.
Great, thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You've ordered third reading of H217. We now have up for, we now will take up the orders of the day. I haven't in them yet. We now have up for consideration H227. 227 was referred to Committee on Judiciary. That recommends that when amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H227, an act relating to the Vermont Uniform Power of Attorney Act.
Now for the report of the Committee on Judiciary, the Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is an exciting bill for anybody over 25. And it's a 70-page bill. I will try to go through it without quoting every one of the 70 pages. But I call your attention to page 2876 in today's calendar. You will see a form. And as we go through this bill, it's important to understand that as a uniform bill, this is trying to make probate easier for people. And the form, you will see, says grant of general authority, and I won't go into all the details, but you see general boxes, real property, tangible personal property, stocks and bonds, etc. If the box is not checked, then the power of attorney doesn't belong. If the box is checked, then you've given the power of attorney to that agent. So, as I said, H227 is a revised Uniform Power of Attorney Act. Power of attorney provides a simple way for one person, called the principal, to authorize another person, called the agent, to act on the principal's behalf. The principal can give the agent as much or as little authority as the principal wishes. Powers of attorney are often used by a person planning for the future and deciding whom they would like to act on their behalf if they became incapacitated. A very important point is these powers of attorney are only for financial matters. Advance directives serve the same function for healthcare, but they're not affected at all by this Uniform Act. Although powers of attorney are common across the country, state statutes regulating their use vary widely, causing confusion for principals, agents, and third parties who deal with agents under a power of attorney. The UPOAA, Unified Powers of Attorney Act, standardizes and modernizes the laws of power of attorney, providing greater protections against abuse and shielding innocent parties from liability. The act also, as I showed, provides a simple, customizable power of attorney form that anybody can use with or without an attorney. As with many uniform laws, the language originally drafted by the National Commission of Uniform State Laws. The original Uniform Powers of Attorney Act was written by the Commission in 1969, which I'm sure the Senator Madison can tell how long ago that was, but it was quite a while ago, Mr. President. It was actually the year I graduated from UVM. And a version of that original act has been on the books in Vermont since 2001. The revised version was approved by the Uniform Commission in 2006, has now been passed by 28 other states, so Vermont would be the 29th state to adopt it. Over the past year, a group of Vermont stakeholders met to review the revised version of the Uniform Act and make any changes necessary for consistency with Vermont law. Those stakeholders, Mr. President, included the Elder Law, Probate and Trust, and Real Estate sections of the Vermont Bar Association, the Vermont Bankers Association, and AARP Vermont. Each of these organizations supports the language of H.227, and AARP Vermont in particular views it as an important planning document for elders. It also helps prevent elder abuse by creating rules regulating what agents may do under the powers of attorney. The Uniform Act consists of 4 chapters, and I won't go into detail in those chapters, Mr. President, unless somebody has a question about any of them. In the interest of time, I would only say that your Judiciary Committee believes that the Uniform Power of Attorney Act is a modern, comprehensive act that encourages the use and acceptance of powers of attorney. It standardizes the law and improves upon existing power of attorney statutes by offering greater protections to principals, agents, and third parties who rely on them. The act preserves powers of attorney at a low-cost, flexible, and private form of decision-making while deterring their use for financial abuse, safeguarding incapacitated principals from fraud, and provides clearer guidelines for agents. Mr. President, your Judiciary Committee voted 5-0-0 for this bill, and we urge concurrence on the part of the Senate. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Judiciary? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Judiciary. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You have ordered third reading of H.227. We now have up for consideration H.31. Third reading was ordered on H.31. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H31, an act relating to aquatic nuisance control.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill, and the question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H31. We now have up for consideration H62. H62 has had third reading ordered. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H62, an act relating to the Interstate Counseling Compact.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill. The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H62. We now have up for consideration H67. Third reading was ordered on H67. Are there any amendments prior to third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H67, an act relating to household products containing hazardous substances.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill, and the question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have passed H67. We now have up for consideration H77. Third reading was ordered on H77, and I believe there's an amendment prior to third reading. Senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment to H77, Vermont's adaptation of physical therapy compact, amends the bill in Section 2, 3 BSA 123 Juliet 1 in subdivision E, following the words physical therapist by inserting the words and physical therapist assistants. No other changes. The committee vote was 5-0-0. The Health and Welfare Committee requests your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the senator from Rutland? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've amended H77 as offered by the senator from Rutland. Are there any other amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H77, an act relating to Vermont's adoption of the Physical Therapy Licensure Compact.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill, and the question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H77. We now have up for consideration H86. Third reading was ordered on H86. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H86, an act relating to Vermont's adoption of the Audiology and Speech-Language Pathology Interstate Compact.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill, and the question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H86. We now have up for consideration H126. Third reading was ordered on H126. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H126, an act relating to community resilience and biodiversity protection.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill. The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. No. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have passed H126. We now have up for consideration H171. Third reading was ordered of H171. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H171, an act relating to adult protective services.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill, and the question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H171. We now have up for consideration H282. Third reading on H282 has been ordered. Are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H282, an act relating to the Psychology Interjurisdictional Compact.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill. The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H282. We now have up for consideration H461. Third reading was ordered on H461, and it appears as though I have an amendment to be considered. And I believe we will just consider that consideration for just a brief moment, as the person that may be offering that amendment is returning to the chamber. Senator from Addison.
Thank you. So the Senate Government Operations Committee looked at the miscellaneous education bill yesterday, specifically sections 9, 10, and 11, which were the sections that changed the number of signatures required for somebody running for a school board seat, in a unified union school district, which are districts made up of multiple towns. And so we wanted to, and we heard some testimony from the Secretary of State's office, as well as the reporter of the bill from yesterday. And we wanted to make sure that we kept the signature numbers consistent with the signature numbers for other types of races in the state. So for example, as all of us know, we need to collect 100 signatures for a race that is a county plus or minus race. Some of us have full counties or full counties plus or partial counties, but a larger number of people in a larger area. Municipal elections that are just one municipality are all 50 signatures. And then school board races that are smaller, just a small school board are 30 signatures. These school boards represent multiple towns, and so we felt like a 60 signature amount was actually appropriate because it's between the 30 and 50 and 100. They are larger land areas and often larger numbers of people. So our amendment would maintain the 60 number of signatures. But the reporter of the bill did mention there are some areas of the state where these are smaller districts with smaller numbers of people, even though they represent a large area. So we maintained the Senate Education Committee's language of 1%. So it's 60 signatures or 1% of the eligible voters, whichever is less. So if it is a very, very small school district, it would be the lesser of 60. So the Senate Government Operations Committee, in considering this, felt like this was consistent with other election petition signature requirements, and that is our amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the senator from Addison and others? Senator from Chittenden Central.
Mr. President, I want to share that the Senate Education Committee concurs with the amendment. Thank you.
Senator from Bennington.
Mr. President, when this bill came before the Senate Appropriations Committee, I asked the very question. In the supervisory union that I lived in, with about half the population of Bennington County, if not 60% of the population of Bennington County, we had at least 3 races that we couldn't find anybody to run for. We had 1 contested race throughout the district. And one of the things I like about the bill, and I can support the amendment, but I think we should really look at why it is that we can't get people to run for office. I mean, the Senate's not a huge problem. A lot of people seem to think it's pretty easy to be in the Senate and they run for office. But, Mr. President, I am really concerned about our local government and our school boards. They are taking heat for basically everything, whether you put in artificial turf or you take it out, whether you I'll get the word wrong, my junior senator will correct me, but whether you do testing for environmental concerns, whatever you do, that school board is under attack. If they want to help deal with trans problems, for example, transgender, they're under attack. And we need to do everything we can to support people who are willing to serve on our local boards and commissions. And so I was impressed with the Education Committee's effort to make it easier to run. And I'll leave it at that, Mr. President. And I think we all have to recognize that that is a major problem, whether it's a town election or a school board election or whatever it might be. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I sincerely appreciate the senator from Bennington's comments, and I agree wholeheartedly. As a former school board member, that is a much tougher job than our job here in the Senate. And he is absolutely right that school board members are under attack across our country. In fact, public schools are attacked across our country, and therefore public school boards are, and including here in Vermont. The Senate Government Operations Committee did consider that issue in this. We also felt that it was important for people to go out into their potential district and really talk to voters across the towns that they might represent in order to get signatures, and that we felt that there were many, many other reasons why why people might not be running for school board, not necessarily attached to the requirement for 60 signatures. And we appreciated the support of the Senate Education Committee. Thank you.
Question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the senator from Addison and others? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
Nay.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended H 461 as offered by the senator from Addison and others. The question now is, shall the bill, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 461, an act relating to making miscellaneous changes in education laws.
I was a little ahead of myself. The question now is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You have passed H 461. We now have up for consideration H 476. H 476, third reading was ordered. Are there any amendments for third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 476, an act relating to making miscellaneous changes to law enforcement officer training laws.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill, and the question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've passed H 476. We now have up for consideration H 488. Third reading was ordered. Are there any amendments for third readings? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H 488, an act relating to approval of the adoption of the charter of the town of Ludlow.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill. The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H 488. We now have up for consideration. Before I indicate this, I just want to thank the Legislative Council who moved quickly in and out of the cloakroom for all of those bills. They're all camped and running in and out, so my apologies for going quickly. We now have up for consideration H 175. H 175 was read for the first time, referred to the Committee on Judiciary, which considers the bill and thinks the bill ought to pass. It was then referred to the Committee on Finance, which also considered the bill and recommends that the bill ought to pass. And the bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which recommends that the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H 175, an act relating to modernizing the Children and Family Council for Prevention programs.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill. For the report of the Committee on Judiciary, the Senator from Franklin, Senator Norris.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the interest of time, I had a 5-page overview of the governing federal laws on this, but we'll bypass on that. H 175 is an overview. Basically, this bill proposes to modernize the Children and Family Council for Prevention programs to comply with the changes to the Federal Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act of 2018. The most obvious changes, the name of the council to be the Council for Equitable Youth Justice. Beyond that, the bill amends the council's role to more accurately reflect its current responsibilities and management of federal funds to support juvenile justice efforts in Vermont. To the bill, Section 1 of the Strike All Amendment and the bill in general amends Chapters 33 of Title 33, which houses the current statutes governing the council. Specifically, Sections 3301 updates the definitions used throughout the statutes, including 1, the name of the council, 2, references to the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Act, 3, references to the Office of Juvenile and Delinquency Prevention, and lastly, 4, references to the Department of Children and Families. Sections 3302A redefines the council's roles as an entity to serve as the state advisory group pursuant to the federal law, serving to assist with the compliance with the law and to promote an effective juvenile justice system. Subsection B makes changes to delineate, that's a tough word, membership and meeting requirements more clearly. These changes include, 1, the council being composed of 21 members, now up to 25 members, appointed by the governor upon the advice and consent of the Senate. 2, consideration given to persons who adequately represent the interests of youth and the families involved in the juvenile justice system. And 3, compliance with federal law and no full-time government employees on the council. Otherwise, there's little change to the selection of officers, how vacancies are filled, quorum requirements, and member compensation. Member compensation is sourced from the council's federal grant. The changes to sections 3303A concern the duties and responsibilities of the council to reflect the federal changes of supporting, monitoring, and compliance. 1, the deinstitutionalization of status offenders. 2, the separation of juveniles from incarcerated adults, sight and sound more commonly referred to. 3, the removal of juveniles from adult jails and lockups. And 4, the reduction of racial and ethnic disparities within the juvenile justice system. Subsection C of 3303 empowers the council to apply for and receive federal funds for activities consistent with state policy and federal law. Subsection D requires the council to coordinate with DCF to develop a state plan in accordance with the federal law by December 1, 2024, and every 3 years after. Subsection E requires the council to submit a written report to the governor, the Joint Legislative Justice Oversight Committee, and DCF describing the council's efforts to comply with federal law. This begins on January 15, 2025, and is required every 2 years after that. Additionally, subsection F requires the council to use a data-driven system in its efforts and to include youth and family voices, which is achieved by the council having those voices within its membership. Sections 3304 and 3305 are repealed as they no longer are part of the core requirements and responsibilities under federal law. Finally, Section 2 of the bill states that the effective date is July 1, 2023. And we heard from Tyler Allen, Adolescent Services Director, DCF Family Service Divisions, Amy Davenport, Vice Chair, Children and Family Council for Prevention Programs, Ben Novogroski, Legislative Counsel, Office of Legislative Counsel, Marshall Paul, Deputy Defender General and Juvenile Defender General's Office, Karen Bastine, Chair, Children and Family Council for Prevention Programs. The vote from your Senate Judiciary Committee was 5-0-0, and we ask for this Senate support. Thank you, Mr. President.
The bill is then referred to the Committee on Finance for the report of the Committee on Finance. Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Finance Committee took testimony from Legislative Counsel on this bill and determined that its impact on the finances of the state would be de minimis. Our vote was 6-0-1.
The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations for the report of the Committee on Appropriations. The Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Appropriations reviewed this bill because there is a provision for compensation, but as you will note, the council members, the source of compensation is from the federal funds that come to the council. Therefore, the impact on the spending was also de minimis, and we voted 6-0-1 in favor of the bill. Thank you.
I've heard the reports of the Judiciary, Finance, and Appropriations Committees. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of H175. We now are up for consideration H489. 489 was read for the first time, referred to the Committee on Government Operations, which reviewed the bill and recommend that the bill ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Finance, which also recommends that the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H489, an act relating to approval of an amendment to the Charter of the Town of Shelburne.
Now, you've heard the second reading of the bill for the report of the Committee on Government Operations. The Senator from Windsor, Senator Clarkson.
Thank you, Mr. President. My report launches a series of charter reports, so get ready. H 489 is the amendment to the town of Shelburn's charter, which the voters of Shelburne passed in this past March at town meeting. This amendment enables Shelburne to levy a local option tax of 1% on sales, meals, alcoholic beverages, and rooms. While Shelburne did not choose to articulate the uses this revenue would finance in the amendment, the town manager did share with us that the town expects to use the revenue they collect from this additional tax for capital improvements, debt reduction, energy efficiencies, land conservation, and repairs or other emergency needs in disaster recovery. The anticipated revenue for Shelburne is about $1.1 million, and 30% of it, of course, will be shared with the state of Vermont to fund our pilot program and the administration of local option taxes. The anticipated revenue to the state is $345,000. Of the 6,880 voters in Shelburne, only 1,431 voted at town meeting. That's only 20.8%. And this charter amendment proposal won on a vote of 838 to 593. We heard from the House reporter of the bill, Legislative Counsel, Joint Fiscal Office, and Shelburne's town manager. Senate Government Operations voted 6-0-0 to pass H 489 and asks for your support.
The bill was then referred to the Committee on Finance for the report of the Committee on Finance, Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Mr. President, your Senate Finance Committee reviewed this bill and approved it out of committee at a vote of 5-0-2. Thank you, Mr. President.
I've heard the report of the Committee on Finance. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of H 489. We now have a, excuse me one moment. My understanding is we're going to pass over 490 for the moment to take up H 504, but now I'm not sure that's going to happen that way. Might we take a brief recess?
Good idea.
Senate will come back to order. Given that the Senate office is creating copies for H490's amendment, we'll move to H504, and activating the approval of amendments to the Charter of the Town of Berlin. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H504, an act relating to approval of amendments to the Charter of the Town of Berlin.
For the report from the Government Operations Committee, I would look to Senator from Washington, Senator Klopp.
Thank you, Mr. President. H504 is an amendment to the Charter of the Town of Berlin, which does two things. It moves the town clerk from being an elected position to an appointed position. This will help the charter align better with current practice, as they already have an appointed town clerk. Secondly, it allows the town treasurer, with approval of the select board, to waive the personal property or inventory tax if the total assessed value is equal to or less than $1,650. The reason this number was chosen is because that is the amount of personal property or inventory value that would result in less than $10 of tax. If the tax bill is less than $10, then it's they decided that it was just not worth anybody's time to chase it down. So Section 1 says that the General Assembly approves the charter amendment and that the voters of the town approve the changes at a vote held on November 8th, 2022. Section 2 outlines the specific charter changes that I just mentioned about the town clerk and the ability of the treasurer to waive small personal property taxes. Section 3 is about the transition from an elected to an appointed clerk, and Section 4 is the effective date, and this bill will take effect on passage. The portion of the amendment that moves the town clerk from an elected position to an appointed position passed the town with a town vote of 568 to 543, and the de minimis amount of personal property value passed 784 to 354, and altogether had an impressive 58% turnout of voters. The Senate Government Operations Committee found this bill favorable with a vote of 6-0-0 and asked for the support of the Senate.
So the question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've ordered third reading of H504. We are now taking up for consideration H505. 505 was read for the first time, referred to the Committee on Government Operations, which recommends that the bill ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Finance, which also recommends the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H505, an act relating to approval of an amendment to the Charter of the City of Rutland.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill. For the report of the Committee on Government Operations, the Senator from Windsor.
Thank you again, Mr. President. I am channeling the former member of Senate Government Operations, the senior senator from Rutland, as I present this charter change to you today. H505 is the amendment to the City of Rutland's charter, which the voters of the City of Rutland passed in March of this year at town meeting. This amendment enables the City of Rutland to levy a local option sales tax of 1%. The revenue they collect from this additional tax shall be used, they put this in statute, shall be used for any of the following purposes. 1, as a deposit in any capital improvement reserve fund. 2, to reduce the deficit in any underfunded pension. Or 3, to finance the construction, reconstruction, or repair of city buildings, streets, sidewalks, or other Rutland infrastructure. The anticipated revenue for the city is $2.2 million, again, 30 of which is to be shared with the state of Vermont to fund our pilot program and the administration of local option taxes. The anticipated revenue to the state is $685,000. Of the 11,882 voters in the city of Rutland, only 3,065 voted at town meeting. An improvement, only 25% here from the last one I just reported. And this charter amendment proposal won on a vote of 1,729 to 1,216. Senate Government Operations heard from the House reporter of the bill, our fabulous legislative counsel and joint fiscal office, and the mayor of Rutland. And the Senate Government Operations Committee voted 6-0-0 to pass H505 and asks for the Senate's support.
Now you've heard the report of the Committee on Government Operations. The bill is then referred to Committee on Finance, which recommends the bill ought to pass. For the report of the Committee on Finance, the Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance Committee took this bill up and hearing from Legislative Counsel concluded that its effect on the finances of the state would be minimal. The vote was 5-1-1.
So the question now is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready? Shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've ordered third reading of H505. We now have up for consideration H506. 506 was read for the first time and referred to the Committee on Government Operations, which considered the same and recommends that the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H506, an act relating to approval of amendments to the election boundary provisions of the Charter of the City of Burlington.
Now you have heard the second reading of the bill for the report of the Committee on Government Operations. Senator from Chittenden Central, Senator Vihovsky.
Thank you, Mr. President. For those of you that were in the General Assembly last year, or for some who've been here many decades, you may remember the joyous process of the decennial redistricting. H506 may bring some memories back of that, as our largest municipality, Burlington, has also redistricted their wards and districts based on population change. The Burlington City Council has 12 members coming from 8 wards and 4 districts, and each district is made up of 2 wards. This ensures that each resident has 2 councilors representing them. You will see on the maps provided how these lines were drawn, a deliberative process that was used to redistrict Burlington, which held the value of compact districts that followed neighborhood lines and took into account public input through public hearings. You will note that one ward, Ward 8, looks a little bit less compact, and this is because this is the ward that contains UVM and Champlain College, and thus has a high proportion of college students, which has been a challenge for turnout and engagement. So this ward was shifted to try and create a less college-heavy populace. I will spare you reading the 14 pages of street names and neighborhood descriptions that are in the bill that tries to put into words what you can see clearly on the map provided. With 30% of the voters voting for this plan of redistricting of the Burlington municipal wards and districts, it passed with 72.5% of the vote on a vote of 7,076 to 2,681. The committee heard from Representative Robert Hooper from the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel at the Office of Legislative Counsel, and Nancy Stetson, the Senior Data and Policy Analyst from the City of Burlington. The committee vote was 6-0-0, and we ask for the body's support. Thank you.
Now you've heard the report of the Committee on Government Operations. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've ordered third reading of H506. We now have up for consideration H507. 507 was read for the first time and referred to Committee on Government Operations, which considered the same and recommends the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H507, an act relating to approval of amendments to the polling place provisions of the Charter of the City of Burlington.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill for the report of the Committee on Government Operations. Senator from Chittenden Central, Senator Vihovsky.
Thank you, Mr. President. H507 is another Burlington charter, and it is somewhat related to the previous charter, H506. This charter will allow for some polling places to be located outside of the ward or district that they are for, in the event that an accessible polling location cannot be found in the ward or district under Title IX. It requires that if the city uses this charter provision and locates a polling place outside the ward or district, that it be near the ward or district. And if it is to be co-located with another ward or district's polling place, that the two be clearly separated. There are in Burlington, for instance, 2 polling places that are across the street from one another. One is in a community center and one is in a church, which some residents have expressed concern about. This charter provision would allow the community center to host both polling locations in separate rooms. The vote in Burlington on this charter provision was 7,623 to 2,345, with 76.5% of those voting to support this allowance for the accessibility of polling places. We heard from Representative Bob Hooper from the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel at the Office of Legislative Counsel, Ashley Angel, Law Clerk with the Office of Legislative Counsel, and Sarah Montgomery, the Assistant City Clerk for the City of Burlington. The committee vote was 6-0-0, and we ask for the body's support.
Now you've heard the report of the Committee on Government Operations. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've ordered third reading of H507. We now have up for consideration H508. 508 was read for the first time and referred to the Committee on Government Operations, which considers the same and recommends that that the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H508, an act relating to approval of an amendment to the ranked choice voting provisions of the Charter of the City of Burlington.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill. For the report of the Committee on Government Operations, Senator from Chittenden Central, Senator Vyhovsky.
Thank you, Mr. President. H508, another Burlington charter. H508 builds on a charter change from the last biennium related to ranked choice voting for municipal elections. Last biennium, Burlington voters opted to conduct its city council races by ranked choice and has since run 2 ranked choice voting elections, a special election in December and a town meeting election in March. The voters of Burlington liked ranked choice so much that they voted overwhelmingly to expand it to all municipal elections, including the mayor, school commissioners, and ward election officers. This does not change the methodology that Burlington is using that was created in ordinance as directed by last biennium's charter, but simply expands it to all local elections. The vote in Burlington was 6,702 to 3,701, 64.4% of the voters supporting this expansion. We heard from Representative Bob Hooper from the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel at the Office of Legislative Counsel, and Sarah Montgomery, the Assistant City Clerk for the City of Burlington. The committee vote was 6-0-0, and we ask for the body's support.
Now you've heard the report of the Committee on Government Operations. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question?
Roll call.
Roll call has been requested by the Senator from Rutland. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? And you're referring to Bill H508 in case they were starting to blur together for anybody. Are you ready for the question? If so, the Secretary shall commence to call the roll.
Senator Baruch.
Yes.
Senator Bray.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
No.
Senator Campion.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Collmore.
No.
Senator Cummings. Senator Hewlett.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hashim.
Yes.
Senator Ingalls.
No.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator Mazza.
Yes.
Senator McCormack.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
Yes.
Senator Perschlick. Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Starr.
No.
Senator Vyhovsky.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
No.
Senator Westman. Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
No.
Senator Renner.
Yes.
Senator Cummings. Senator Perschlip. Senator Westman.
Please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yea, 21. Those voting nay, 6. And you have ordered third reading of H508. In case you think you're living through the matrix, you are not. However, we now have up for consideration H509. H509 was referred to the Committee on Government Operations, which considered the same and recommends that the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H509, an act relating to approval of amendments to the voter qualification provisions of the Charter of the City of Burlington.
I've heard the second reading of the bill. For the report of the Committee on Government Operations, Senator from Chittenden Central, Senator Vyhovsky.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Of course, you will be shocked to learn that H509 is yet another Burlington Charter amendment. I promise, though, that this will be the last Burlington Charter for today. H509 is often known as all resident voting, and Burlington has voted to join the cities of Montpelier and Winooski in allowing all legal and tax-paying residents to vote in local elections on the issues that affect their daily lives. All resident voting was passed in the 2 previous municipalities in the last biennium and was challenged in the Vermont Supreme Court. On January 28, 2023, the court ruled that all resident voting is indeed constitutional, and both municipalities were able to expand voting in their local elections to all legal residents in this year's town meeting elections. In Burlington, according to the 2020 American Community Survey 5-year data, 5.5% of the city's population are non-U.S. citizens. And additionally, 5.1% of the city's population has been through the naturalization process. All legal resident voting could impact thousands of community members in Burlington. The city clerk estimated it might be as many as 2,000. The vote in Burlington was 7,143 to 3,366, which is 67.97% of the voters supporting this change. We heard from Representative Mike Morwicki, the reporter from House Government Operations and Military Affairs, Sarah Montgomery, the Assistant City Clerk, the City of Burlington, and Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel with the Office of Legislative Counsel. The committee vote on this charter amendment was 5-1-0, and we ask for the body's support.
Now you've heard the report of the Committee on Government Operations. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question?
Roll call.
Roll call has been requested. The question is, shall H509 be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, the Secretary shall commence to call the roll.
Senator Baruch.
Yes.
Senator Bray.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
No.
Senator Campion.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Collmore.
No.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Hewlett.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Rashid.
Yes.
Senator Engel.
No.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Senator Lyon.
Yes.
Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator Mazza.
No.
Senator McCormack.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
No.
Senator Perschlip.
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Starr.
No.
Senator Vyhovsky.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weiss.
No.
Senator Westman. Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
No.
Senator Renner.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yea, 21. Those voting nay, 8. And you have passed H509, order third reading of H509. We now are returning to H490, which is on 2880 of your calendar, if you're in or out of order here. The bill was first read and referred to the Committee on Government Operations, which considered the same and recommends that when amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H490, an act relating to approving the merger of the Village of Lyndonville with the Town of Linden.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill, and now for the report of the Committee on Government Operations, Senator from Addison, Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday was Compact Day. Today is clearly Charter Day. And so now we are not hearing a charter change for the city of Burlington, but a charter change which would merge the village of Lyndonville and the town of Linden. When hearing about this, we heard the interesting story about the village of Lyndonville, which is pretty much located within the town of Linden, but it's its own separate legal municipality. And it was created basically by a railroad company. It was a company town, almost quite literally, created by the railroad. And the housing built in the village were for the people who worked for the railroad and also the executives of the railroad. So there's some very lovely old Victorian houses that line the town, the village green, and are remnants of the history of the town. It also includes its own electric utility, which makes it a much more sort of complex situation when merging with another town, because the charter has to take into account what to do with the utility as well. But this has been a merger that's been in the works for over 20 years, and a former member of the other body, former Representative Marty Feltis, has been taking the lead on this for many, many years. And she provided us with some excellent testimony and history about this. So one of the big drivers for this merger was the differentials in tax rates for the town and the village, even though they share a lot of the same services and literally the same sidewalks and roads. Because the village is much smaller, its tax rate is much higher than the town. And so this would merge and also equalize the tax rates in the town through a sort of rolled in process so that it doesn't hit everybody at one time. This is a lengthy 34-page charter because it is brand new, merging these two towns, and has the complexity of the electric utility and the tax rate changes in it as well. But this was approved by the voters last November 8th. They did it on a general election day. The overall approval was 948 yeses to 651 noes overall, and then there were separate counts for the village and the town. The approval in the village was higher because it would benefit the village probably a little bit more with their tax rates, but it was still a healthy vote for the town as well. So this would create now the town of Linden, and it would eliminate the village of Lyndonville. But it would, it would be kind of subsumed in the town that basically surrounds it right now. So if you look at the charter provisions, they are very standard. It merges, it approves the adoption of the town of Linden, and the voters of the town of Linden and the village of Lyndonville approved the merger of the two municipalities, as I said, last November 8th on election day. And so the first chapter of the merger, or the charter, is just merging the two. The second subchapter provides for the municipality's ordinance procedures and governs ordinances for covered bridge damage, the record book for ordinances, and zoning regulations. In the other body, the most looked at portion of this was about covered bridges. I think there are, I believe Representative Feltis said there are 6 covered bridges in the town. So they are very important to the town, and they wanted to make sure they were covered in their charter. This subchapter also includes one of my favorite headings of a section. It is called the Record Book of Ordinances. Kind of reminds me of something out of Harry Potter. So I really like that as a section title. But the Record Book of Ordinances is something that the town clerk would keep of all of the ordinances. The Senate Committee on Government Operations has a little bit of an amendment in this section, which I'll get to after I go through the charter. I'm not going to go through all of the details of this charter, so if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. But the next subchapter provides a list of elected offices, elected officer qualifications and duties, terms of offices, and other office and how to deal with officer vacancies. The offices include a 5-member select board, a moderator, 5 trustees of the Cobley Library. We were impressed at how the library is integrated into the town and village and their charter as well. 3, 4, or 5 listers as determined by the select board, 1 town agent, 1 town clerk, 3 trustees to the Sanborn School Fund, justices of the peace, and a town treasurer. And then there's some specifics on how the terms for each of the offices and what they do, which I won't go into detail. It's fairly standard. It establishes the powers and duties of the select board, and then the select board organization and the process for select board meetings in the next subchapter. In the following subchapter 5, it provides the perimeters of the town for the town meeting and town election. So how they will run their town meeting and their town election. Subchapter 6 contains the zoning, planning, and land use provisions of the town of Linden and creates the Linden Development Review Board. Subchapter 7 provides guidance for the town of Linden fiscal year, town budget, and municipal tax rates. Subchapter 8 addresses the composition and duties of the Linden Electric Department. As I mentioned, they have their own electric department that serves, I believe, 36 towns, if I recall. So it serves a number of towns in the area, not just Linden. And so this is fairly dense utility law that's in their charter. And then subchapter 9 includes provisions for separability and the continuity of employment for current town members and sort of legal and administrative matters and municipal laws. And section 3 of subchapter 9 is the agreement between the town of Linden and the village of Linden, and contains the transitional provisions for the select board members and for the finances and budget of the town, including the tax rates that I mentioned earlier. This charter goes into effect on July 1st, 2023, which is why you'll hear a motion to move it through all stages of passage, just to make sure that this makes it before the end of the session so they can proceed with their business. And if, well, I guess the amendment hasn't yet been passed out, so I will just finish this report and then we can do the amendment. We heard from the reporter in the House, our legislative counsel, and as I mentioned, Marty Feltus, who is a member, I think she's the chair of the merger steering committee, who provided a lot of great information. So the vote in committee was 6-0-0, and we ask for your support. Thank you, Mr.
The amendment has been handed out if you'd like to continue.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
yes. Too much paper on my desk. Okay, so the amendment from the Senate Government Operations Committee. This charter was amended quite a bit in the House to make it more consistent with our statutes and to sort of clean up the language to make sure it was clear. But there were a couple things that your Government Operations Committee felt still needed further revision. One of the things in this charter is that the voters in the new town of Linden are able to put referenda on the ordinance referenda on the ballot. And there are a few towns in Vermont, I think 6, I believe, who are able to do this, including actually my town of Middlebury. But there was a little bit discomfort on this. So what we added was language that is included in many other town charters that have this power, that the proposed ordinance shall be examined by the town attorney before being submitted to the special town meeting. And the town attorney is authorized, subject to approval of the select board, to amend the petition ordinance to correct repetitive, unlawful, or unconstitutional provisions, and to ensure accuracy, clarity, and precision in its text, legal references, and phrasing, provided that these technical corrections shall not change the meaning of the proposed ordinance. So that just gives a legal review to make sure that the voters aren't asking for something, or the proposers of a new ordinance aren't asking for something that legally doesn't work. Then the other thing is there was a mention of keeping the ballot boxes open for a certain number of hours on election day. We got confused about what ballot box means in this context, particularly because we now use drop boxes, and we were like, is this drop boxes or the tabulators? And what Representative Feltus said to us is that what they mean is polling places. So we just replaced ballot boxes with polling places. And the third instance of amendment is a very technical correction change that our legislative counsel found when he was reviewing the draft. So that's just a technical amendment. And your Committee on Government Operations, as I said, approved this amendment at 600, and we ask for your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
So the question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Government Operations? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Government Operations. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've ordered third reading of H490. Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. Given the time constraints mentioned by the Chair of Government Operations, I would move that H490, an act relating to approving the merger of the Village of Lyndonville with the Town of Linden, be moved through all remaining stages of passage with the intention to add a messaging at the end with all the other bills.
Now, the senator from Chittenden Central, just if I could make sure that I got that accurately because I was distracted, that the senator moves to suspend the rules to place H490 through all remaining stages of passage. However, the message to send it to the other body would happen with the other collective measure. Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have suspended your rules in order to place H490 through all remaining stages of passage. Third reading of H490 has been ordered. Are there any amendments for third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
H490, an act relating to approving the merger of the Village of Lyndonville with the Town of Linden.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill. The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed H490. I believe that now takes us to H158. H58 was read for the first time, referred to the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy, which considered the same and recommends that when amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Finance that recommends that when the bill is amended, the bill ought to pass, and the Committee on Appropriations, which also recommends that when the bill is amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H158, an act relating to the beverage container redemption system.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill, and for the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy, the senator from Windsor, Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I speak to the underlying bill as well as the amendment?
You certainly may.
Okay. My local redemption center is Hartford Redemption. The Hartford Redemption Center is owned by the Trombley family, and their family has been in the redemption business for over two generations. The Trombleys provide their redemption services to Vermonters in 5 separate locations, including Hartford, Springfield, Virgins, Bradford, Heinsberg. But they had to close their Heinsberg Redemption Center 3 months ago because they could no longer afford it. Their story is not unique. While Vermont businesses across the state have been struggling with inflation and worker shortages, our redemption centers are at a unique disadvantage. Their ability to profit is set in statute. We have not changed the fee that they are paid to keep pace with inflation. Now, redemption centers across Vermont, across our state, are struggling to remain open and to provide their services to our communities. The bottle bill is Vermont's most successful recycling law, having recycled over 10 billion cans and bottles in Vermont. It may also be the most popular environmental law that we have. Nearly 9 out of 10 Vermonters support the bill. But if we don't step in and help redemption centers pay and keep good workers, we're hurting Vermonters and our small businesses. The Trombleys are now having to contemplate the possibility of the closure of their redemption businesses altogether and moving into new trades if we don't see the bill that I will describe from you shortly pass. They're in strong support of this legislation and say it will allow them to stay in business. Now let's dive into what the bottle bill is. The bottle bill was originally passed, and I've heard this, I don't know, in 1972. The fundamental goals of the program 50 years ago were to reduce litter and divert used bottles and cans from our landfills. Now, this program does much more than that. It has 3 main goals. First, it's an example. What this bill will now do, what this program will do, the following 3 things. It's an example of an extended producer responsibility program that shifts the burden of paying for collection, disposal, and recycling of products or packaging away from private citizens and onto the businesses that make and sell products. We already have this kind of program for things like electronics, thermostats, mercury light bulbs, and paint. We heard a little bit about this with the household hazardous waste bill that we recently passed out of this chamber. Second, it's helped to create jobs accessible to Vermonters of all backgrounds and beloved businesses that in our communities have helped us center recycling and make it better. Third, it creates the cleanest and most valuable stream of recycling in our state, which allows beverages and containers to be recycled over and over again. Furthermore, the 3 main bills of this bill and to build on those benefits would be the following. First, we need to bring the program into the modern age by creating a producer responsibility organization. You're going to hear a lot about that in my floor report, so remember that acronym, Producer Responsibility Organization, a PRO. That is an idea that came from the beverage industry itself and gives manufacturers authority and responsibility to run the programs more efficiently. The concept of the PRO specifically has strong support from the Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC. Second, it supports redemption centers and consumers by making redemption centers more profitable and holding the PRO accountable for adding more convenient redemption centers across the state. Third, it would achieve huge environmental benefits by adding recycling more containers through the bottle bill program, including water bottles, sports drinks, wine, and much more. By adding more beverages in the program, we will be improving our recycling while cutting air, water, and climate pollution. It's not surprising that a law passed over 50 years ago could use an update, but it's worth noting that Vermont has not fallen behind nearly every other state that has a similar program. For example, our current law covers approximately 46% of beverage containers sold in Vermont. That includes beer, carbonated soft drinks, mineral water, wine coolers, and liquor. Other beverages like bottled water, energy, and sports drinks, iced tea, those were basically unheard of when Vermont's bottle bill was originally enacted. And now they make up over half of our beverage market, including over 200 million water bottles sold in our state each year. It's confusing to many Vermonters. Understandably, they can't figure out why craft beer, but not craft cider, or liquor, but not wine, or seltzer, but not water when they're going to their redemption center. Since 2017, 17 countries covering a population of over 300 million folks have adopted bottle bills of some kind, including states like Connecticut, most recently, and California, have passed major updates to their own bottle bills, increasing deposits, adding beverages like those sports drinks, juices, and wines that I mentioned. And the vast majority of these new and updated programs include an enhanced form of that extended producer responsibility I called for earlier, calling on a producer responsibility organization, which our bill does the same. Lastly, the Universal Recycling Law that was passed in 2012 and created a requirement for material recovery facilities, another acronym coming your way, get ready, MRFs, the MRFs, are open or they had, in 2012, they had to open and expand and enable trash haulers to offer the convenient option of single stream collection and disposal. That's back in 2012. So we have 2 MRFs in Vermont. They are collection sites that sort single stream materials and then send them to be recycled. Both redemption and single stream industries are vital to that waste disposal process that we're talking about. So that's kind of the context for where we are historically. I gave you the guidance on what we're talking about with small businesses. But one last point before I turn us to the bill itself and walk you through the section by section. And that's that not all recycling is created equal. It's not the same. Many people are under the impression that your cans and bottles are treated the same whether you return them to, for example, if I were to return my bottle to my Hartford Redemption in the Trombleys, or if I was to throw it in my blue bin. But that's not actually the case. Take glass, for instance. A few years ago, we learned that 18,000 tons of glass collected for recycling, equivalent to around 30 million wine bottles, those were improperly dumped in several locations over 5 years by the owner of one of those material recovery facilities, one of those MRFs. That led to a $400,000 settlement with the Attorney General's office in our state. That glass was simply too dirty and too contaminated to find a better market. By contrast, nearly all of the glass collected under the bottle bill the bottle bill system ends up being recycled. And in fact, much of it is turned into glass bottles again. Isn't that the goal? That's why glass recyclers, as well as aluminum and PET recyclers, strongly support this legislation. They need that clean material to make new containers again. So many of us agree that the bottle bill provides benefits to consumers and to our natural environment. Vermonters certainly agree with that. Over 83% support an expansion, and they don't want to see the program going away. So that's the crossroads. In fact, we need more redemption centers and a better run system. And I think that that's what we can all agree on. The bottle bill is not going away. Vermonters like it, but we have to improve the system of redemption to make sure that it facilitates the kind of recycling that gets us the end product that we want. And that's what this bill does, and what I'm now going to walk you through section by section. And thank you for your patience on this long history and expansive expansion of the bottle bill. As previously mentioned, you can see some parts of the amendment on 2890 in today's calendar, but I believe you also were handed out a copy of the bill. So if you have a copy of the bill, please review that. So Section 1 amends 10 VSA Chapter 53 of the Beverage Container Redemption. Section 1521.1 amends the definition of beverage to read all drinks in liquid form and intended for human consumption except milk, dairy products, plant-based beverages, infant formula, meal replacement drinks, and non-alcoholic ciders. So that's very clear. If you are previously familiar with some of the back and forth on this bill, do we include milk? Do we not include milk? We're not including milk in this bill. 1521 amends the definition of container with the focus on materials that they're made from. Specifically, a container would now be defined as the individual and separate bottle, can, or jar composed of glass, aluminum, or other metal, polyethylene terephthalate. I practiced that one, guys. Thank you. High density, now I'm not going to say it right, HDPE, or any combination of those materials containing a beverage. Non-carbonated beverage containers with a volume greater of 2.5 liters and carbonated beverage containers with a volume of 3 liters would be exempt. 1521.11 adds a definition of cider, i.e. hard cider. 1521.12 adds hard kombucha. Who knew? That's a seeped beverage of tea, if you're not familiar. Technically, these products are vinous beverages, as they are fermented from fruit. If they are not defined and exempted from vinous beverage definition, though, they would be subjected to a deposit of 15 cents instead of the intended 5 cents. 1521.13 section adds a definition of plant-based beverages to mean a liquid intended for human consumption that imitates dairy milk, consists of plant material suspended in water, and the primary protein source in the beverage is from plant material or a derivative of plant materials. Plant-based beverages include beverages made from rice, soy, nuts, oats, and hemp. So our federal delegation might debate that definition, but for today, that's what we're going with. Plant-based beverages are exempt from the beverage definition and therefore not subject to the container deposit. Section 1521.14 adds a definition of vinous beverage and is largely consistent with the definition of vinous beverage under the state alcohol laws in Title VII. Section 1522, the beverage container deposit. Now we move more into the deposit section. Section A under that establishes the container deposit amount for vinous beverages at 15 cents per container. Liquor remains at 15 cents and other beverages remain at 5 cents. 1522A also requires that the Department of Liquor and Lottery, DLL, to report to A&R annually with the amount of liquor bottles collected with their redemption rate. DLL runs the program to collect redeemed liquor bottles and retains the abandoned deposits from those bottles. 1522B increases the non-commingling fee from 4 cents to 5 cents per container. So think about our family, the Trombleys, when we talk about this section. It maintains the current commingling handling fee at 3.5 cents. These are the fees manufacturers or distributors pay to redemption centers or retailers for collecting, sorting, and handling those containers. Commingling, if you're unfamiliar with the terminology, means the sorting of beverage containers by material type and size, rather than by each specific beverage brand in accordance with requirements and approved manufacturer's agreement. So if you have ever walked into a redemption center and there's somebody who's putting the bottles in special bins, lots and lots more bins is not the goal of this legislation. In fact, the goal is to incentivize through the PRO to commingle so that you have fewer sorts, meaning an individual is literally putting them in different places fewer times, if that squares with what you've seen when you've walked into your own redemption center. 1522D, requiring redemption centers and retailers to redeem beverages at least 40 hours a week is repealed because it's not being implemented or enforced. 1522A is a repeal of the rules. The changes in this bill make the directives of the section obsolete. So we've removed it, and you'll see in a subsequent section that we grant A&R general rulemaking authority, Agency of Natural Resources. In section 1523, we have the acceptance of beverage containers. It authorizes a retailer to opt out or refuse to redeem beverage containers if the stewardship plan meeting the requirements of the Act has been implemented by the PRO in the state and the retailer's building is less than 5,000 square feet. If you have questions around the retailer's space and that 5,000 square feet piece, this is something that we can talk about later, but I want to highlight it today because I know that's been a point that's come up in previous iterations of this bill. 1524, labeling. So currently all beverage containers subject to the deposit must include the word Vermont or the letters VT and the refund value of the container. Metal containers are required to have this information on top of the container, with more beverages being produced in aluminum bottles and other containers where it is hard to actually label the top of the container. So 1524A1 strikes the requirement for those metal containers to be labeled on their tops and instead allows for any container to be labeled with an A&R approved method that secures the information to the container. It also allows a manufacturer or distributor alternatives to listing the refund value. They could list the actual refund value, i.e. the 5 cents, or the words refund value, or the letters RV. This is important should the 5-cent automatic escalator take effect, but you're going to hear a little bit more about that later, and some changes and amendments that came from our friends in finance, I believe, was the escalator change. So that would be helpful, but you'll find out more. 1524A2 allows labeling on the top of the lid, the side, or in a clearly visible location on the container. So you can see what exciting step. We did talk QR codes, but we ultimately did not include that in the bill. But if you would like to talk to me about QR codes, we did talk a little bit about that too. 1524D authorizes A&R to allow a manufacturer, distributor, or retailer of vinous beverages to attach a sticker to the container to meet the container label requirements. This is helpful for current inventory that may need to be used up. So the idea is if you got a whole stockpile of incredible wines and you can't go back and change the label, you can pop a sticker on it as long as it meets the requirements for your big back stock of, I don't know, 1965 Chardonnay. So 1527, penalties are repealed. This section repeals the penalty of up to $1,000 for the violation of provisions in this chapter. A&R has the authority to impose penalties under its default enforcement authority in 10 VSA chapter 201. So that's why we did that. 1529.2 is about redemption center certification. It repeals a requirement that a redemption center must participate in an approved commingling program if they redeem more than 250,000 containers per year. You can see that we're managing that in a different way. 1531, that section looks at manufacturer participation in the PRO, that producer responsibility organization. This is the kind of heavier part of the bill that makes it so that we can move the system forward, that we can improve our redemption center work that we're doing. 1531A specifies that no manufacturer or distributor may sell or distribute a beverage container in this state without participating in an A&R approved producer responsibility organization. In 1531B, it requires manufacturers to apply to the Secretary of A&R to form a PRO by January 1st, 2024. So you can see we've got a good timeline, and I have a copy of that timeline if anyone would like to see it laid out in kind of a graphic form. 1531C, the Secretary may approve a PRO for a period not exceeding 10 years, provided that, one, the PRO has the capacity to administer the requirements of a stewardship plan. Second, that the PRO does not create any unreasonable barriers to manufacturers or distributors for joining that PRO. So that's a helpful tool. It shall take into consideration the needs of small manufacturers that do not generate a significant volume of containers. And we spent some time on that conversation because we know that there are different size manufacturers. They're not all large California-based wine distributors or manufacturers. It is also our smaller distributors. 1531D, after approval, a PRO shall maintain a website, very helpful, that identifies, one, the name and principal business address of each manufacturer participating, two, the name of each beverage and container size covered by the stewardship plan. 1531E is that if the PRO does not meet its requirements or the stewardship plan, A&R may dissolve the PRO. In 1531F, if no PRO is formed, which is unlikely, but let's say no PRO is formed. No one, even though these organizations and companies have told us that they're interested in this, let's say nothing happens, they don't listen to us. A&R may require the formation of a PRO or adopt its own stewardship plan. If A&R administers the plan adopted, A&R shall charge each manufacturer the cost of plan administration, including the oversight costs and a recycling market development assessment of 10%. These fees would be deposited in the Waste Management Assistance Fund solid waste account for the purpose of providing grants to develop markets to recycle materials. 1532 gets into our stewardship plan and the minimum requirements. 1532A, the PRO shall submit a stewardship plan to an ANR on or before October 1st, 2024. At minimum, it must meet the following requirements. So this is where we get into what does that PRO have to look like. So we have to see convenience of collection. Something that the chair of our committee likes to say is that it should be as easy to buy a can of soda or buy a bottle as it is to deposit a bottle and to redeem a bottle. So I like to think about that when we talk about the convenience of collection section that is required under the stewardship plan for our PROs. So let's get into it. The plan, as we envision it, shall ensure that customers have convenient redemption opportunities. It shall take reasonable efforts to site points of redemption equitably across all regions of the state to allow for reasonable redemption access. It shall document how redemption services will be available to customers as follows. A, at least 3 points of redemption per county. B, at least 1 point of redemption per municipality with a population of more than 7,000. And C, how collection point sites will be sited in areas with high population and density or located in designated areas under 24 VSA Chapter 76. And a waiver can be granted by Secretary of ANR as needed. Second, we want to see fair operation and compensation for those redemption centers. The plan shall satisfy all of the following requirements. A, the plan shall describe how all locations that redeem beverage containers are fairly compensated for their participation. B, there shall not be barriers to the participation in the collection program for a redemption center, except for restrictions authorized by the Secretary. C, the plan shall describe how management and sorting of containers at redemption centers is minimized. Back to that commingling conversation, not having someone having to sort tons and tons of different bottles into different bins. We want to mitigate as much of that as possible. The plan shall then document how brand sorting will be eliminated at points of redemption. D, the plan shall describe how materials will be picked up from, from redemption centers on a timely basis. The plan shall maximize use of existing infrastructure when establishing those collection points. The third role that we would like to see the PROs play is an education of our consumers. The plan shall describe the education efforts to be undertaken to increase redemption rates. Fourth, they will be consulting with those stakeholders. The PRO shall consult with stakeholders on the plan development and at least annually with stakeholders, including the agency, redemption centers, municipal and private recycling organizations. Okay, we're getting there, folks. 1532B is on reporting. No less than annually, the PRO shall report the following things to ANR. First, the name, address, and business hours of each participating redemption center. So that sounds like a great place to find out where the closest redemption center is. Second, the amount in containers and tons and material type of beverage containers redeemed by the categories broken out into A, vinous beverage containers not including liquor, and B, all other beverage containers. 3, they'll show the location and amount of beverage container material that was recycled and what products that beverage container material was recycled into. That's going to be some key data for us to understand. 4th, it tells the carbon impacts associated with the administration of the stewardship plan. 5, the costs associated with the administration of the stewardship plan, including costs of collection, management, and transportation, and the amount received for commodities. We didn't really delve into the commodities market, but that is a section of the bill that we want to make sure that when we get a report back that we understand the relationship. 6, improvements made in the year to increase convenience for consumers. 7, efforts to reduce environmental impacts and to increase reusability or recyclability of those materials. 8, the PRO's efforts to improve the environmental outcomes of the program. 9, the educational materials and educational strategies that the PRO uses. And 10, any additional information required by the Secretary. And that refers to the Secretary of ANR. 1532C, ANR shall approve a plan if the plan will maximize diversion of recyclable materials, provide convenience to users, and create a more circular economy. The Secretary shall approve, Secretary approval shall not exceed 5 years. Then we get to section 1533, where the program and fiscal audit where there's a fiscal audit of the program. 15, in section A, under that, it begins March 1st of 2030. The PRO is required to conduct an independent third-party audit of the stewardship plan, and every 5 years thereafter. The audit shall make recommendations to improve the operation of the collection program. B, it requires that the PRO conduct a third-party fiscal audit annually for the transparency to analyze its expenditures, the number of beverage containers collected, and the number of unclaimed deposits, as well as the redemption rates. And then C, the results of each audit must be submitted to ANR. 1534, the beverage container redemption rate goal. We set these goals. We'll talk a little bit more about what's been referred to as the trigger point that was changed by finance. You'll hear that in their amendment. But let's talk a little bit about what the beverage container redemption rate goals are. Exciting. So it sets the goal for minimum beverage container redemption rates as 1, beginning on July 1st, 2026, 75%. You're going to notice a pattern over this. And then in July 1st, 2030, 80%. July 1st, 2035, 85%. July 1st, 2050, 90%. You'll notice 5% each time. Beginning on July 1st, 2025, ANR annually will report to the legislature the current beverage container redemption rates for the following 3 categories: 1, liquor bottles; 2, Vinius beverage containers; and 3, all other beverage containers. In section 1534C, beginning on January 1st, 2028, ANR will determine the rate of redemption, or the redemption rate goal established in subsection A of this section. And if it was not met for either of the categories for 2 consecutive years, the beverage container deposit for the category shall increase by 5 cents. That is what we have in the underlying bill. You will see a removal of that in, you'll hear more about that with the finance amendment. But the maximum deposit for any beverage container shall not exceed 10 cents for Vinius beverage containers and liquor bottles, and shall not exceed 10 cents for all containers in the underlying bill. Within 1 year following the Secretary's determination under this section, manufacturers and distributors shall comply with the labeling requirements of 10 VSA Section 1524. Before assessing the relevant deposit established under this subsection for the beverage container. 1535 is rulemaking. Spoke about that earlier. This is the section that we allow ANR to adopt rules necessary for administration of the beverage redemption system. And then within section 2 and 3, it amends 10 VSA 1530 regarding the remission of escheats. See, I had always thought they were escheats. I've recently learned that they are escheats. And escheats, if you're not familiar, are the unclaimed redemption. When you don't deposit, if you don't redeem, it's what's left over. That's the escheats. So section 2 amends 10 VSA 1530 to allow the PRO beginning in 2026 to retain 50% of the abandoned beverage container deposits to aid in funding implementation of the stewardship plan. Section 3 amends 10 VSA 1530C1 effective July 1st, 2031 to revert the requirement that 100% of the abandoned beverage containers deposits to the state. And the Ways and Means Amendment that we saw in the House had further amended that, that section. And we also have we go on further with section 4 to have a standard notice and comment procedures section. It also updates a technical correction. And then section 5, we talk about the Clean Water Fund and provide that 50% of the escheats shall be deposited into the Clean Water Fund, and the effective date of that is July 1st, 2031. Then section 6, we have that we would require the deposit of 50% of the escheats to the Waste Management Assistance Fund beginning July 1st, 2031. I think that's hard to understand verbally, so that's why I wanted to make sure you all had the fiscal note, which should be on your desk. To see kind of that information. Section 7 has a systems analysis of the beverage container system. It requires that ANR on or before January 15th, 2025 to submit a legislative report on the total system costs associated with the implementation of the beverage container redemption system. This would include an estimate of the total system costs and savings with the implementation of the expanded beverage container redemption system. 2, an estimate of the impacts of an expanded beverage container redemption system on the recycling system, which would include the number of containers collected by the expansion, operational savings at the MRFs, the loss of material facilities from the removal because of the removal of containers, and the estimated impact on tipping fees of each of those MRFs. We would see an estimate of the cost of operating a redemption center and other alternative points of redemption, and a recommendation on whether the handling fee should be altered or replaced with an alternative means of compensating points of redemption. We would also see an estimate of the overall impact of recycling in the state and the redemption rates of beverage containers if the PRO implementing the stewardship plan were authorized to retain even 150 or more of the escheats. An estimate of the impact on the Clean Water Fund and the implementation of the state's water quality programs and regulatory requirements if the abandoned beverage container deposits were not deposited into the Clean Water Fund under 10 VSA 1388. We get to Section 8, which repeals the beverage registration and redemption center certification. That repeals the 2 current statutes that require beverage registration with ANR and repeals the requirement for the certification of those redemption centers. So currently, manufacturers and distributors must register their beverages with ANR prior to sale in the state, and redemption centers also need to be certified within ANR to operate. In 2025, though, when the PRO is operating, a beverage cannot be sold in the state unless it is covered by that PRO's plan and is listed on the PRO's website. So at that point, registration with the ANR folks would not be necessary. We don't want to be duplicative. We want to make sure we're streamlining it into one location. Similarly, the PRO must identify all redemption centers working under the plan and certification from ANR. So again, that would not be necessary. So Section 9, we see a transition plan with implementation. When implementing the changes in this act, especially when the scope of the bottle bill is expanded, those water bottles, wine bottles, ANR will need some discretion actually in implementing and enforcing this. So Section 9 allows ANR to allow beverage containers to be sold or redeemed that do not meet labeling requirements. So if there's certain instances, maybe a fancy bottle, we'll see what happens. ANR will decide. We would also determine whether a beverage or container is subject to the bottle bill due to the nature of the beverage or the composition or size of the container, and they would exercise discretion in the administration and enforcement of the requirements of the bottle bill. This discretion is not permanent and shall be repealed as of March 1st, 2028. Section 10 has the bottle bill recycling materials reporting. It requires manufacturers and distributors that are currently subject to the bottle bill to report recycling information to ANR in the same manner as recycled materials are reported to ANR by materials recovered by MRFs and similar facilities. That's the amount in containers, tons, materials, beverage containers collected, and the location and amount of beverage containers. Section 11 brings us to the effective dates. The effective dates, it takes effect on July 1st, 2023, and then Section 1, and that takes effect on January 1st, 2027. So there's a few, you're going to hear a few different dates. Again, that timeline can be helpful if anyone needs a visual of that. So Section 1 has, with the UPC labeling on containers, that takes effect March 1st, 2025. Then Section 1, which has the prohibition on the sale or distribution without participating in the PRO, that shall take effect March 1st, 2025. Section 2, that's the remittance of the abandoned beverage container deposits. That takes effect January 1st of 2026. And Section C, which is the repeal of the remittance of the bottle beverage container deposit, is July 1st, 2031. Section 5, which changes the amount of funds deposited to the Clean Water Fund, goes into effect or takes effect January 1st, 2031. And then Section 6, the Waste Management Assistance Fund, takes effect July 1st, 2031. Mr. President, to summarize, the bill includes the following provisions. Its goal to increase cleaner materials into the redemption program. It keeps more containers out of our landfills and off of our roadsides. If you had the privilege or problem of going out on Green Up Day, you know exactly what we're talking about. It increases the redemption center non-commingling fee from 5 cents to 5 cents from 4 cents. And that's their first revenue adjustment since 2009. It adds PET and HDPE water bottles and other Simwich beverage containers. It adds glass wine bottles for 15 cents. It adds hard cider and kombucha. It stands up that PRO organization with the stewardship plan. It shifts the program responsibility from A&R to the PRO. It makes redemption convenient by requiring the PRO to add more locations and to increase convenience. It allows small redemption stores less than 5,000 square feet to opt out. It shares the sheets with the PRO to help fund that requirement. It keeps the deposit amount at the current level unless participation rates don't increase as specific percentages over time. Again, wait for finance on that one. It allows time for manufacturers to stand up their programs. It allows time for the current inventory to be used up. It allows time for manufacturers to adjust their labeling requirements. And it adds a one-time escalator should participation rates not reach their goals. Again, underlying bill. And it maintains contributions to the Clean Water Fund. It would shift additional sheets contributions 50-50 between the Clean Water Fund and Solid Waste Management Assistance Account after 5 years starting in 2031. That's about $4 million minimum to the Clean Water Fund. And it requires the PRO to meet with stakeholders to improve current collection systems, and it allows A&R to create rules. Couple of things it doesn't do. It does not include 50 milliliter liquor bottles, the NIPS. It does not automatically increase deposits to an additional 5 cents. It excludes milk containers and plant-based milk beverages, infant formula, meal replacement drinks, and non-alcoholic cider. And it excludes large beverage containers, non-carbonated beverages at 2.5 liters or carbonated beverages after 3 liters. Mr. President, I have a long list of witnesses that we heard from both on the House side and the Senate side. If you would like to see it, I have a printout of it. I'm happy to go through some of the names, but for context, just a couple of the organizations that you might have wanted us to hear from, that we did hear from. We heard from multiple redemption centers and ranging from Montpelier to Putney. We heard from our incredible legislative counsel, Michael O'Grady. We also heard from folks from the Glass Packaging Institute, the Beverage Association of Vermont, the National Waste and Recycling Association, Vermont Public Interest Research Group, the Vermont Wine Growers Association, Waste Management Protection Division of A&R, the Container Recycling Institution, Casella's Waste Management Team. We heard from the sponsors of the bill. We heard from the Vermont Retail and Grocers Association. We heard from the Can Manufacturers Institute. We heard from the Northeast Kingdom Waste Management District. And we heard from the Vermont Agency of Transportation on an exciting glass program that they have, which I'm happy to describe more of if you'd like. But that brings me to my concluding thought, which is expanding the bottle bill just makes sense. Thank you.
The bill is then referred to the Committee on Finance, which recommends the same. When amended, the bill ought to pass. Please, Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate Finance Committee reviewed H-158, the bottle bill, from two perspectives, both fiscal impacts as well as operationally. You've already received a copy of the fiscal note and there's ample detail there, but the bottom line is that H-158 would result in an overall increase to the Clean Water Fund revenues compared to the current law. In terms of operations of the bill, the Senate Finance Committee is proposing 3 instances of amendment. They appear in today's calendar beginning on page 2891. In the first instance of amendment, we altered the language around the automatic escalator. That is, that the bottle deposit would increase automatically, triggered by a change in redemption rate or failure to meet the redemption target. In conversation with the Agency of Natural Resources in particular, one of their recommendations was there are many other tools available, such as public outreach, enhancing the ability to redeem, and a variety of measures that don't involve the deposit figure amount itself that could improve redemption. So rather than put us on an automatic escalator, changing the fee based on redemption rates, it has the Agency of Natural Resources making a report back to the legislature and including a recommendation as to whether or not that fee should be changed. The second instance of amendment deals with an existing section of the law, Section 7, Systems Analysis of the Beverage Container System, which is a report that the Agency of Natural Resource shall contract through an independent third-party consultant to conduct a systems analysis of the efficacy and cost of Vermont's beverage container redemption system. On page 2892, we lay out a relatively lengthy list of costs and benefits of the operations of that system, and that report was expanded to address impacts, in particular on consumers. And in the third instance of amendment, appearing on page 2893, there was, again, one of the fundamental features of H158 as currently in front of you is to address the issue around difficulty in redeeming bottles. I think there was widespread support for improving the ability to redeem easily and conveniently. And the first 2 years of 158 are all oriented to improving that redemption. That said, the committee was interested in ascertaining prior to expanding the scope of bottles covered, containers covered, as to whether or not those improvements have actually been seen. So there is a report on the status of the recycling system, now included in the proposed to be included. On a refined January 15, 2026, the Secretary of AR&R shall submit to the Senate committees and relevant House committees a report on the status of the recycling system, including a summary of the operations, identification of points of redemption, assessment of whether or not these points of redemption are now achieving convenient and reasonable access, and any recommendations to improve the convenience of the redemption system. So those are the three instances of amendment proposed by the Finance Committee. The committee's vote recommending it to the Senate is 5-0. And if I may, Mr. President, on behalf of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee, which has reviewed this proposal amendment, Senate Natural Resources and Energy supports the amendment from Finance on a vote of 4-1-0.
The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which considered the same and recommends that when the bill is amended, the bill ought to pass. For the report of the Committee on Appropriations, Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate Appropriations Committee reviewed the bill and paid particular attention to the effect on the Clean Water Fund. And then we have voted favorably to vote the bill out of committee for consideration for the Senate as a whole. The vote in committee was 5-0.
So the question is, shall the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy be amended as offered by the Committee on Finance? Are you ready for that question, Senator from Bennington?
President, may I inquire the reporter from the Finance Committee?
The senator from the Committee on Finance is interrogated.
Mr. President, I'm happy to see the Finance Committee took out the automatic increase in deposits that came over from the other body, but I am concerned that you continue with the asking for a recommendation about increasing deposits based upon fewer beverages coming back. I mean, it's the people that pay the deposit, not the company. And you're punishing the people who are redeeming their products and not the ones who aren't redeeming it. It seems backwards to me, Mr. President. Secondly, Mr. President, in the second and third amendments, and I don't know if we had a discussion of this in appropriations and I missed it, but there would be a cost for the agency to contract with an independent third-party consultant to conduct a systems analysis on the system. So I'm wondering if you have an estimate on the cost.
I don't have a figure at hand, but we'll be happy to get that figure for you.
Mr. President, was the Agency of Natural Resources going to cover that cost within their budget?
Again, I appreciate the question, and so that I can give you an accurate answer, I would propose that I bring you that information part of third reading.
I thank the reporter, Mr. President. Mr. President, I think the three sections by the Finance Committee, which I will support, but truly have the cart before the horse. Shouldn't we do the systems analysis and figure this thing out before we pass a bill? Changing the system, increasing the number of items that are required deposit. I recognize that many people support this bill, but I'm concerned, Mr. President, that once again, we're going ahead, creating a huge system in the state. And I would love to see these reports, and then I would feel more comfortable to vote a positive vote on the overall bill, but I will support the Finance Committee amendments. I think they do improve this bill.
Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to note that the systems analysis would be billed to the Producer Responsibility Organization. And I just, as a follow-up on the idea of shouldn't we fix the program first before we expand it, you know, I would argue that we update, while we do update the scope added in H158, it would go into effect January 1st, 2027. And this 4-year timeline would provide ample time for our manufacturers to get a new system up and running.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. The thought behind the Finance Committee's amendments. First, we heard testimony that in the states that had greatly expanded the number of renewable bottles, I think California, it took 6 years to get back to the redemption level as, you know, a percentage. So to say you had 1 year and if you weren't back at the 75% we're at now, there was an automatic increase did not sound fair. So we left that to A&R to decide if there should be. And we were concerned, a lot of concern in the committee, since this is partially billed as an environmental bill, about the impact on greenhouse gases if one needs to drive. I've got a 15-mile round trip to redeem bottles, and then I've got to go in the other direction if I have a farm that will take my household waste, formerly known as garbage. And other people, we had, you know, people that live in other parts of this county frequently have a 25-mile one-way. I don't know who they heard from in Montpelier, but there is no redemption center in Montpelier. The city took it down to put up a park. So Barry is the one redemption center I know of. Apparently there's a church that collects bottles in the valley. So we wanted to make sure that the infrastructure was in place before we triggered this. And so there is a report back in 25 about the adequacy of the infrastructure. We need to know we have enough redemption centers so that people, 50 miles is a lot of extra, you know, and I don't redeem the bottles where I buy the bottles. So that's another extra trip. We want to make sure that there's adequate redemption with adequate ease, that the PRO is up and running, and that there's our issues now with the bottles being picked up in a timely fashion and redemption centers being having large rooms full of bottles that were supposed to have been picked up. So the idea is that with the report, this legislature, or the next one, will have the ability to act if, in fact, the system is not there to make this transition go smoothly.
Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to follow up on a welcome correction from the previous speaker, which is, yes, we did not hear from a redemption center in Montpelier. Apologies, we heard from North Branch Vineyards in Montpelier.
Yes.
Senator from Franklin.
Thanks, Mr. President. I share some of the same concerns that the senator from Bennington raised, as well as those of the senator from Washington. I live in a rural area as well. My nearest redemption center is 5.1 miles away. My nearest place to dispose of compost is 3 miles away in the other direction. I can buy bottles about a mile away. Now, that said, it was very interesting to hear the testimony of some of the witnesses in support of the bill. I was particularly struck by the representative from VPIRG, who testified how she handles redemption and how it's no major problem. She lives in the north end of Burlington, and she rides her bicycle with the bottles to the redemption center in Winooski. And I thought to myself, for those of us who live in rural areas, as someone on my road, a woman who is 76 years old, her husband is 79, she's recently had heart surgery, and I picture her on her bicycle carrying her bottles to the redemption center in St. Albans. There is a requirement in the bill, even as amended, that says that there will be at least 3 redemption centers per county. Well, my county is 697 square miles. And I'll guarantee you there are places in that county in which you can't drive, much less ride your bicycle within a reasonable period of time to get to a redemption center. And again, as I look at this bill, and I think all of us listened intently at the description of what's in this bill from the reporter, and the amount of time it took her to explain it to us. It's as if we hired an agency of complexity to design this. And I think back to this bill, you know, we started this, what, 1972. It is now over 50 years later. And imagine if we designed this at the turn of the last century, the century before. We would have designed a bill and updated it so that we use the most modern horse wagons and buggy whips in order to make this run. Well, it's now 50 years later, and maybe it's time to design a better system, and there are better systems. There are systems of single cycle recycling, which are single stream recycling, which are better, perhaps. Some would argue, and I've heard conflicting testimony about the cleanliness of glass, for example, that comes out of them. But it's not the same system that we used half a century ago. And maybe it's time to figure out what that means. I'm particularly struck by the importance of one thing in the amendment from the Committee on Finance. And that is the look at what does it cost? Not just what does it cost the people who are involved in the system. Because the thing that we never collected is what does it cost us? What does it cost the consumer? And when you are doing as I do, as the senator from Washington does, and others do, if you calculate the amount of miles that you have to drive to go to a redemption center, and in my case, and I've heard it in other cases, you then stand in line on a Saturday morning in your car, typically with the motor running if it's cold, for 40 minutes while you wait to get to the head of the line to turn your bottles in. What does that cost? What does it cost? How much carbon are you wasting by doing it? And what's the value of Vermonters' time? I spend that 40 minutes plus the 25-minute drive back and forth, plus the trip in the other direction to get rid of the compost. What's my time worth? How much have I contributed to the atmosphere in terms of carbon emissions from my car doing that week after week? And you multiply that by the thousands of Vermonters who do the same thing. It's time that we do a thorough analysis. Somewhere in here it referred to an audit. I would, by third reading in the underlying bill, go back and say an audit performed under generally accepted government accounting standards. Because I see so many agencies and others who give us audits that aren't audits, that aren't valid, that haven't taken into account a real methodology to determine is what we're being presented accurate. And above all, the one thing that we're doing in this bill, I support the amendment by the Committee on Finance. I do not support the underlying bill. Because I think what we've done, and the senator from Bennington alluded to it, is we've done what we do so often, is we've designed a system, we've designed a plan, we've designed infinite complexity and infinite involvement by thousands of people by the time you get finished. And we've then said, we're going to do a study to see how it's working before designing the plan to see, does this make sense to do in the first place? And it seems, again, the cart is, in fact, before that horse, who is no longer pulling the wagon after 50 years. Madam Mr. President.
The question is, shall the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy be amended as offered by the Committee on Finance? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You have amended the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as offered by the Committee on Finance. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? Are you ready for that question? Senator from Caledonia.
Wonder if I might
Senator from Bennington.
Order for the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. President.
The senator from Natural Resource and Energy Committee is interrogated.
Mr. President, I thought I heard in the beginning of the report that 9 out of 10 Vermonters support this bill. And I want to make sure that we've got the right number for the right thing. I suspect, at least from the letters I receive, or emails, I don't receive many letters anymore, emails I received, the calls I've had, probably 9 out of 10 Vermonters support expanding the items that are redeemed. I'm not sure they support this bill. I'm not sure they know what's in it. Could you correct, did I hear you, mishear you?
Thank you, Mr. President. You did not mishear me. 9 out of 10 Vermonters are supportive of the bottle bill. The reason that that point is relevant is because the bottle bill, by my estimations, is not going anywhere. So we're stuck in a critical moment where we can either choose to allow it to continue to flounder, where we lose more redemption centers like the Trombleys that I mentioned earlier, where Vermonters have to travel a greater distance, or we can choose to shore it up. Do this bill and actually do the support that needs to happen where redemption centers will be expanded and actually grow the bottle bill. So I would argue that while the question and the poll, from my understanding, was done prior to, obviously, at least the finance amendment, that Vermonters have shown through different surveys that they're supportive of the bottle bill, and I understand that when someone says they support something, that probably means they don't want to slowly die due to lack of investment.
Mr. President, a few other questions, although I must comment that I'm not always respectful of polls. I'm not sure they give us the information that we expected. Anyway, Mr. President, I see that a store or center of 5,000 square feet can refuse to redeem bottles. What does that do to your goal to have more places? And I actually looked up and Googled 5,000 square feet because I have no idea what that is. It's 12 and a half two-car garages. So I wonder, that's a pretty large, I have a two-car garage. If I had 12 and a half of them, that'd be a pretty large place. Why are we exempting 12 and a half garages?
That's a wonderful question. Your Committee on Senate Natural Resources and Energy contemplated what the right size is, and we settled on 5,000 square feet because of testimony we heard from individuals who were retailers.
Okay. Mr. President, next question is, will stores of over 5,000 feet, or those stores who wish to redeem bottles, be able to use automatic redeeming machines and cover themselves that way?
Thank you so much for that question, because it opens up a whole conversation that we have not yet had today, which is the excitement of the reverse vending machine. If you're not familiar with a reverse vending machine, you could travel over to the local grocery store just down the street here. Essentially, so yes, the answer to your question is yes, excitingly enough.
Thank you, Mr.
And you could, okay, thank you.
I'm glad to hear that it's a yes, although they do make a lot of noise at my local Price Chopper. Finally, Mr. President, I wonder why we chose 15 cents for wine. A lot of, well, I don't have a lot of wine producers in my district, but the ones that I do have were curious about why 15 cents on wine.
Thank you for that question. Why, if I understand the question correctly, it's why 15 cents, and I assume not the 5 cents that was for the other, not higher.
Yes.
Okay,
Right.
so we settled on 15 cents. That was the proposal that came over from the House, and I think because it more closely aligns with the cost of the other similarly sized liquor bottles.
I thank the reporter, Mr. President. I don't need to expand on my earlier remarks, but I do think while the Agency of Natural Resources is doing an examination, and I look at my district and I wonder how far somebody from Rupert with one little store is going to have to travel to find the Redemption Center. Now, those of you who don't know where Rupert is, it's right in the Meadowy Valley. And their kids go to school in the Meadowy Valley, but they have to go to college to school. Rupert's a nice little town. I've enjoyed representing them, but they're going to travel quite a way to redeem their bottles, and that is one of the issues that should be addressed in the study, and I'm glad it will be. However, Mr. President, I cannot support this bill. To me, it's too convoluted, has the cart before the horse, and we should do the study and then determine how we want to set up a new system. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. In this world of false dichotomy, I think probably if you get up and oppose this, you're viewed as not concerned about the environment or how we dispose of solid waste. I am an avid recycler, but I also live in the Northeast Kingdom, and I also live along the Connecticut River. And we're talking about struggling businesses, and we've been looking at it in the context of redemption centers. But many, many small stores are right along the Connecticut River within sight of New Hampshire. We already have, people laugh and say there are more Vermont license plates at the Walmart in Littleton than there are in St. Johnsbury. So where you live determines how you may look at this. And I'm looking at it on the impact on our small businesses. Many of them are not the Price Choppers, they are privately owned. And I'm thinking about what will be the impact in terms of where will we change behavior? I think we will change behavior in certain parts of the state, and what that behavior will be is where they go to purchase. And by expanding, obviously, the items that are subject to the deposit, you're increasing the cost for people with the most limited income who live in rural areas. So I do support recycling. I remember a number of years ago, the senator from Essex Orleans actually introduced, not a current senator in this body, to expand the bottle bill and the deposits. That bill was withdrawn because of the negative impact it would have in terms of reducing the volume of items to be recycled, and they needed that volume to support the investments in our recycling system. We have heard from waste management districts that we have created. Now, we have created recycling and waste management districts since 1972. Actually, in my mind, if we were truly modernizing, we would actually look at how we replace what got created in 72 with what we have to deal with waste today. So I am listening to this. I may be somewhat unable to put all the pieces together, but it seems to me we're creating a parallel system. It seems to be very complicated. We have a lot of studies. We have ANR that is going to be doing a lot of work here, just as we passed H126 when it came to Senate appropriations. ANR said they were totally stretched, and they actually had to request an additional position to support the work associated with that bill. So I worry about the workload that is created. I worry that, in fact, what we're doing here is going to have disproportionate impacts on different areas of the state, and whether you're rural. And I want to support recycling. I think redemption, we talk about redemption, but in the end, we're talking about how we take an item from the consumer's shelf and get it to recycling. To me, that's it. Whether it's gathered through a multi-step process or whether we do it the way we normally would. So for all of those reasons, I am not going to be able to support this bill because I think it has disproportionate impacts. I'm not sure that it gets us any further to where we need to be to get that item to recycling. And I am concerned, obviously, about the impact. We shouldn't be doing this to increase the amount of our S-sheets or as a revenue generation method. We should be looking at how we dispose of all our waste. And I just don't see that this gets us to any place where we shouldn't be without the complexity that this bill is creating. So for all those reasons, I will be voting no. And again, a no vote should not be construed as you're not concerned about recycling, waste management, or the environment. Thank you.
Senator from Orange.
Mr. President, the senator from Franklin said we should be designing the system. We need to design a system. Mr. President, 50 years ago, we had a system. It was designed by the private sector. You went and bought your beer, you bought your soda. When you were finished, you took the bottles back. You had a deposit. I think a 6.5 ounce Coke was a 2-cent deposit on a 5-cent beverage, 40%. We had that system. And that was designed by the private sector. About 50 years ago, maybe 55 or so, that sector sat down and decided it was going to modernize the beverage business. And they put their heads together and they came out with their new plan. It was called No Deposit, No Return, the modern system. They started to make flimsy beer bottles that broke easily. It must be the ones in the bar fights that break over people's heads. The old beer bottles, your heads would break before the bottle did. But those bottles were recycled and reused. We had a viable recycling system for beverages. No deposit, no return was a policy that they touted, advertised on TV, advertised in billboards back when we had billboards. That was the system that was designed. And it was replaced with throw it away. Throw it away in the landfill, which in my town was over the bank into the stream. Throw them away. No deposit, no return. I'm sure most senators were out last Saturday. It was a nice day participating in Green Up Day. Green Up Day was you look at the first green update, was after the interstate, after no deposit, no return, where Vermonters who care about their environment, with Governor Dean Davis's prompting, went out and cleaned up the roadsides and picked up the results of no deposit, no return. Caused some havoc down in Washington, D.C. when they heard that the interstate highway had been closed by Vermonters picking up trash and bottles and cans on the highway, and admonished Vermonters not to do that again, that it was against the law to close down the Interstate 89 to pick up bottles and trash and cans. In the intervening years, we have watched on television numerous public service advertisements paid for by the Beverage Association urging us to recycle. They talk about how they have a goal of recycling this percentage, that percentage, the next percentage. But the money that they spend for recycling is conducting the public service ads. That's what they spend the money on, not on recycling. The bill that we have before us doesn't raise the price of the redemption of the nickel can. If senators want to indulge themselves at lunchtime today, buy a 12-ounce soda in the cafeteria, which I think is $1.85, not 10 cents like it was back when we didn't have a bottle deposit. And then go to the cash register and ask for your nickel back and see how that works out in this environment. Mr. President, we rely on our private sector to do many of the things that they do well, but taking care of trash isn't one of them. We had testimony the other day from our largest collector of trash or garbage, who's less than 50 years ago wanted to open a trash burning plant down in the Rutland area. The senators from Rutland will recall. And they had contracts with many towns in the area to collect their trash, which they planned to burn in the incinerator. And that was a proposal of its time. And some of the towns had a contrary idea that thought they would try and recycle paper and recycle cardboard and recycle things that they could perhaps get a little bit of money for and not burn. And the towns were sent letters saying, we own your trash, you can't recycle it, it's ours, and we plan to burn it. And if this persists, we likely go to court to get that trash because we plan to burn it. Now, we know that burning facility was never built. But some believed at that time that was a better system. As no deposit, no return was a better, more modern, more up-to-date, more less wasteful, more convenient. That's what we had until we put created the bottle deposits here in Vermont. And green update. I have a new town in my district thanks to redistricting, and one that's Bradford, and the senator from Windsor talked about the company that operates the collection facility in Bradford, which doesn't sell bottles and cans. It doesn't sell beverages, it just collects them. The senator also mentioned the one that had been closed because it wasn't profitable, like it was Heinsberg. And, but the ones along the border are doing well. And you say, why are they doing well? Well, apparently the bottlers of beverages figure, hey, we can sell those things in New Hampshire with bottle deposits on them. If they get redeemed, we, the bottlers, have to make good on that, pay the redemption back. But they don't care, because for them, it's cost of doing business, and we hear a lot of talk about fraud. There's fraud because people are buying cans in New Hampshire that say, 5-cent deposit. What's fraudulent? It says 5-cent deposit. You bring it back to Vermont, you get your 5-cent deposit. The bottlers who figure it's a good business decision, it's almost as good as no deposit, no return. They sell them over there and they're willing to pay back the deposit because they're making enough money that it's a good deal for them. It's producer responsibility has produced no deposit, no return. Producer responsibility has produced sell the cans in New Hampshire. People bring them back in Vermont. Hey, we'll pay the nickel back. Cost of doing business, we're doing fine. Heck, we're selling sodas for $1.85 if you sell them in the right place. Vermonters are frugal people, and they travel and return their bottles and cans. An 85-year-old woman that struggles to drive someplace to pick up with a basket to pick up to take her empties. How did she get them when they were full? Last time we had a bottle deposit bill was in finance, the last decade at least. One of the questions was, we don't have enough space in our facility to do this. And we said, how about we say, you don't have to, no one has to collect, no one has to take the bottles back if they don't want to. Would that help you out? I think it was halfway between here and the Canadian border. And they said, oh, no, we need to take bottles back. Why? Just because people have their bottle deposit money and they're ready to spend it. We need it. We want them coming back to get their bottle deposit money. You're complaining about a bottle deposit, you wish you didn't have it, but when you're told you don't have to do it, suddenly they wanted to do it anyway because it was good for their business. Mr. President, this bill is a long time coming. Should have been done years ago. Should have been done. While we've not done it, we've watched sports drinks, iced tea, things that, all sorts of bottles and containers that aren't soda and beer. The senator from Caledonia, who is no longer, who retired last year, once made some progress in this body by banning props, because he went up to Berlin Corners here and walked down the median and came in with 2 big green plastic trash bags of all the bottles and cans and plastic containers that didn't have a deposit, and he presented them to us here in the chamber. And since then, we've been admonished not to bring in props. So this bill has been a long time coming. It's a step in the right direction. There's some things that will probably be amended and changed when it passes to facilitate things that some of the inconsistencies that people worry about possibly having. and I would urge senators to support it in the Vermont tradition of we pick up after ourselves and we don't invite people to throw stuff over the bank, in the stream, out the car window, and into the adjoining hayfield where repairing your tractor tire is about $350 for having run over a broken wine bottle that got tossed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Franklin.
President, I'd like to just comment a little briefly and expand briefly on some of the remarks from the Senator from Orange. We have a no deposit system now. We just don't realize it. In 1972, we put a 5-cent deposit. Well, if you apply the consumer price index, that 5 cents today is 38 cents. Now, maybe if we had a 38-cent deposit, it would be more attractive to return bottles. But lots of people do, and that goes to what the senator from Caledonia said, is most Vermonters are responsible. We believe in protecting the environment, and that's why people bring bottles back. It's not for the nickel. It's because it's the right thing to do. And the point is, we're now in a new century, and we need to look at things with those goggles and those glasses on our faces. I live in a bottle attractive site. I live on the Highgate Road in Swanton between St. Albans Town and Highgate Center. And I can tell you how long it takes a person to eat a Big Mac because I can measure it in distance at 55 miles per hour from the nearest McDonald's. It's on my lawn. I also get bottles. But the bottles aren't necessarily from the people who are responsible folks who would take the bottles back in the first place. They're from the kid who is drinking underage and is driving home and doesn't want to arrive home with beer bottles in the car. They go out the window. And I can tell you this, in 36 years of living in that same place, I have not found one wine bottle on my lawn. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to take a moment to just respond to a few thoughts. I think there was a misunderstanding of testimony heard from one of the advocates at one point. The advocate was not describing her current trip in which she bikes with her bottles, but what would need to happen in the situation where the Burlington Redemption Center is closed, because then she would have to travel a greater distance. So that's not the current concern, but in fact, what would happen if the Redemption Center was no longer affordable or viable for the business owners, which is the main goal and concern that this bill addresses. I also want to note that there was a question or a comment around the significant cost impact to our solid waste districts. And that is something that we took testimony extensively on. And while all solid waste districts feel differently about this program, there is consistent agreement that including wine bottles in the bottle bill would benefit solid waste districts. We also heard explicitly from the Northeast Kingdom Waste Management District that they would not see any, they did not indicate any increased costs. And while we might see some of the MRFs losing PET plastic for water bottles, for example, or a small amount of aluminum cans like the hard cider cans, they would otherwise have gained from selling on the commodities market. It's extremely hard to tell with the timeline of the bottle bill and the possible redemption rates and the value of the commodities market and more what the increased cost would be. And that's one of the goals that we put in the bill.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to correct the record, I don't know what the witness before Finance meant to say, but what I heard was there was no mention of a recycling center in the city of Burlington. It was on Saturday morning, I put my bottles in my backpack and I bicycled to Winooski. And I remember saying, just picture the elderly person who's bad knees, who has the same number of bottles, but really can't bicycle to Winooski. The subject, at least in finance, never came up about a potential recycling center closing.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. No.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question?
Roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Senator from Franklin. Question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we proceed to a vote, I just want to back up and remind senators of 2 points very briefly. One is there is a major opportunity in terms of cost savings, environmental impacts, improved recycling, a lengthy list of benefits of simply handling our materials in a way that leads to better outcomes. At the same time, we know that it's somewhat inconvenient to return bottles under the current system. That's why the first 2 years of this bill are focused on making redemption more easy and convenient. There's now reports back to ensure that we don't proceed to any expansion of the scope of redeemable bottles until that's achieved. And you know, the goal mentioned by my colleague from Senate Natural was we'd like someday to make redeeming a bottle as easy as buying it in the first place. One thing that goes along with that is there are numerous technologies deployed in other jurisdictions that are doing just that. We heard a little bit about reverse vending machines. The same place you bought something, you would also be able to use a reverse vending machine. There's also, we didn't have once upon a time systems like curbside recycling with pickup. There are jurisdictions where redeemables are also picked up curbside. When you create an opportunity, the private sector responds to that opportunity and brings in new customers by virtue of offering a better opportunity. So to find the sort of quote unquote, I would say like horror stories, you know, that we could construct and make us seem as though this is impossible to do. There are many, for the vast majority of instances, it is much more convenient, and there are many more opportunities if we proceed with a modern system to have both ease and better outcomes.
Question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, the Secretary shall commence to call the roll.
Senator Baruch.
Yes.
Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
No.
Senator Campion.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
Nay.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Collmore.
No.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Hewlett.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hashim.
Yes.
Senator Engel.
No.
Senator Kitchell.
No.
Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator Mazza. No. Senator McCormack.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
No.
Senator Pershman.
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
No.
Senator Starr.
No.
Senator Bihowski.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
No.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
No.
Senator Renner.
Yes.
Please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yea, 19. Those voting nay, 11. And you've ordered third reading of H-158. Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's been a long morning into the afternoon, and I think it's best if we break off here. But before we do, I would move that the Senate suspend our rules and message actions taken during this section to the House. That would include H-31, an act relating to aquatic nuisance control, H-62, an act relating to the Interstate Counseling Compact, H-67, an act relating to household products containing hazardous substances, H-77, an act relating to Vermont's adoption of the Physical Therapy Licensure Compact, H-86, an act relating to Vermont's adoption of the Audiology and Speech Language Pathology Interstate Compact, H-126, an act relating to community resilience and biodiversity protection, H-171, an act relating to adult protective services, H282, an act relating to the psychology interjurisdictional compact. H452, an act relating to expanding apprenticeship and other workforce opportunities. H461, an act relating to making miscellaneous changes in education laws. H476, an act relating to miscellaneous changes to law enforcement officer training laws. H488, an act relating to approval of the adoption of the charter of the town of Ludlow. And H490, an act relating to approving the an act relating to approving the merger of the village of Lindenville with the town of Linden.
Now, the senator from Chittenden Central has moved that the Senate suspend its rules in order to message your actions to the House forthwith on the following bills: H31, H62, H67, H77, H86, H126, H171, H282, H452, H461, H476, H488, and H490. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have suspended your rules in order to message the following bills to the House forthwith. H31, an act relating to aquatic nuisance control. H62, an act relating to the interstate counseling compact. H67, an act relating to household products containing hazardous substances. H77, an act relating to Vermont's adoption of the physical therapy licensure compact. H86, an act relating to Vermont's adoption of the audiology and speech language pathology interstate compact. H126, an act relating to community resilience and biodiversity protection. H171, an act relating to adult protective services. H282, an act relating to the psychology interjurisdictional compact. H452, an act relating to expanding apprenticeship and other workforce opportunities. H461, an act relating to making miscellaneous changes in education laws. H476, an act relating to miscellaneous changes to law enforcement officer training laws. H488, an act relating to approval of the adoption of the charter of the town of Ludlow. And H490, an act relating to approving the merger of the village of Lindenville with the town of Linden. To the House forthwith. Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I would move that pending announcements, the Senate stand in adjournment until this afternoon at 4 p.m., at which time we'll try to work with the notice calendar, moving things to which there is no objection back over to the House so that we can keep our exchange moving. So that would be 4 p.m., Mr. President.
Now, the Senator from Chittenden Central has moved that pending announcements, the Senate stand adjournment until today at 4 p.m. Are there any announcements? Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance will meet at 1:45 with the 4 o'clock agenda. We are going to be working into the evening, so get your lunch and come on down to committee.
Senator from Orleans.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Senate Ag, we need to have a short meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Thank you.
Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Education will meet for about an hour, starting at 2:15.
Senator from Rutland.
The Health and Welfare Committee will meet tomorrow morning at 9:30 to close out nominations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate institutions will meet immediately after follow the gavel. We have witnesses waiting.
Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee of Conference on the FY 2024 budget will meet at 2. We just had a bill referred to us, so I would ask committee members to be alert to a text or communication because hopefully we can take that bill up at some point today between Committee of Conference and 4 o'clock. So just stay tuned. Thank you.
Senator from Madison.
Senator Box will not meet.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, the Senator from Chittenden Central has moved that the Senate stand adjournment until today at 4 p.m. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the Senate will stand adjournment until 4 p.m. today.